Okay. Good evening. I'm going to go ahead and reconvene the meeting, and thank you. Welcome to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 Board meeting for March 2nd, 2020. Would everyone please rise and the gentlemen remove their hats and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, again, thank you for being here with us tonight or watching online. My name is Casey Morserow, and I'm the board chair. I'll be conducting tonight's meeting. Before we get going, I just want to introduce our participants up front, and I will start at my far right with Miss Lynn Town. She's our clerk of the board. Next to me is Dr. Steve Cook, our superintendent. To my left is Miss Jen Brumley, our vice chair, Tambra Pickford, trustee, Lisa May, trustee, and Rebecca Smith, trustee. Public comment for district-related items is scheduled near the start of the meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted in writing to the board through the clerk. Okay, is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded by Ms. Brumley. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. All right, we'll start with board recognition. I'm going to invite up Dr. Nelson to the podium, and he's going to help us. We're going to recognize our district spelling bee winners.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair Morserow and members of the board. Good evening, everyone. Coeur d'Alene Public Schools is proud to announce the winners of our district spelling bee, which was held on January the 29th. Students and winners in grades 4 through 8 advanced to the North Idaho Regional Bee, which was held this last Saturday at Schuler Auditorium at North Idaho College. At this point, we'd like to introduce our winners to you by grade level and have them meet our superintendent, Dr. Stephen Cook, and board chair, Casey Morserow. Our third grade winner comes to us from Skyway Elementary School with parents Brian and Carissa, as well as siblings Damien, Haley, and Alice. This is Charlotte Hober.
Hey, Charlotte. I'm going to hold the mic for you, okay?
Hello, Charlotte. Are you ready for your championship word one more time?
Yes.
Your championship word is jubilant.
Jubilant. Jubilant. Jubilant.
Well done.
Mom, you want to get one too? Good job. And shake Dr. Cook's hand too.
And Charlotte, if you could wait on the side, they'd like to get a group picture as well. Our fourth grade winner comes from Bora Elementary School, tonight with stepfather Dan Thorne, mother Amarissa Roden, and sister Hazel. Please welcome Viviana Dyerson.
Hi. Here, I'm going to hand you the mic.
All right, Viviana, your championship word was centipede.
Centipede. Centipede. Centipede.
Perfect. Our fifth grade winner from Sorensen Magnet School of the Arts and Humanities, tonight joined by Father Samuel and Mother Rebecca Smith, one of our trustees, as well as Stephen, Sisters Lucy, and Mercy. Please welcome Samuel Smith. Hello, Samuel.
Hi.
Your championship word is ricotta.
Ricotta. R-I-C-O-T-T-A. Ricotta.
Delicious. Now we'd like to introduce you tonight to our middle school winners. In fact, we had one winner from Canfield, one from Lakes, and one from Woodland, sharing the love for everybody. Our 6th grade winner comes from Lakes Middle School, tonight with parents Mark and Lisa Rakes, who's a librarian at Sorensen Magnet School, and with brother Palmer. Please welcome Emerson Rakes. Hi, Emerson.
Hi.
Your championship word was jeepney.
Yeah. Jeepney. Jeepney. Jeepney.
Do you want to tell everybody what it is?
Nope.
Congratulations, you got it correct.
We got to get your picture with Scott.
By the way, a jeepney is a converted jeep that's made into a bus common in Southeast Asian countries. Which, of course, Our 7th grade winner hails from Woodland Middle School, tonight with parents Ben and Nicole Daly, as well as sister Brooklyn Daly. Please welcome Connor Daly. Hi, Connor.
Hi.
Your championship word was tyrannical.
Tyrannical. Tyrannical. Tyrannical.
Very good. And our final district winner hails from Canfield Middle School. In fact, she is the regional runner-up for the entire North Idaho region. She's here tonight with mother Ann Anderson and stepfather Travis Anderson. Please welcome Sarah Fleshman.
Congratulations. Come on up. I'll give you the mic.
Sarah, your championship word was consortium.
Consortium. CONSORTIUM. Consortium.
Wonderful.
Oh, real quick, can I ask you a question? So you had the regional spelling bee this weekend, right? Yeah. How many rounds did it go?
58.
Congratulations. Thanks.
38
Thank you.
between the final two.
38 between the final two. Awesome.
You want to get one more picture, everybody?
There they are, ladies and gentlemen, our district spelling bee winners. Congratulations.
Good job, guys. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Pickford, who's going to go through our Invest, Inspire, Innovate Awards and Shining Star Award winners.
We have quite a few of these as we did. We have January and February. So our first teacher of the month for January comes to us from Venture High School. She's a reading teacher, Diane Eastman. And our next teacher of the month was from Lake City High School. It's always awesome when you show up to the class and they were fully in a circle getting ready to do stuff and staring at us like, what is going on? So anyways, this is a drama class. It was awesome. Sandra Seaton. And our next one for February, this was double whammy. They co-teach together. We actually did 3 in one day at Woodland, which was awesome. Lisa Wick and Gretchen Bell, 7th and 8th grade English Language Arts and Math Boost at Woodland Middle School. The next teacher of the month for February is a 5th grade teacher at Sorensen Magnet School, and it's Katie Palmer. And a 2nd grade teacher at Atlas Elementary is Stephanie Walker for the month of February. Dacia Turner. And a Shining Star Award goes to Dacia Turner. She's a Title I liaison at for Coeur d'Alene Public School. Did I pronounce her first name right? Dacia. Sorry about that. Thank you. I usually check with Mike. And he wasn't here when I saw him. I was already seated up here. I always run everything through you, so I missed you. My bad. The next one is Shining Star Award for Woodland Middle School, and it's Debbie Dotson, and she's the office manager / treasurer. She had no idea because she went with us on the first two, and then we all came back, and she was like, "What's going on?" And it's always nice when that happens. And our last shining star is Beth Lang, and she's accounts payable assistant for our Coeur d'Alene Public Schools. So please join me in congratulating all of them.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pickford. We'll move on to high school student body reports, and I'm going to start with K-Tech tonight. I think I saw you out there. Welcome. If you'll just come over to the mic at the podium there, and just hit the red button, make sure the red light's on there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Noah Dannenberg. I'm a senior at K-Tech in the automotive program. Thank you for your guys' support. It's really helped me get into the automotive field, and with the teaching and all of the different subjects that we study, it's helped a lot of people with just understanding more on electricity and just all the different functions of the automobile. We are currently rebuilding a couple vehicles right now. We're rebuilding a Yukon, which is more of an SUV. We have a couple Jeeps in. We're building a bunch of like four-wheelers and like dirt bikes and a bunch of small little things that are nice and fun and easy to work on. We recently had our second annual job fair on the 21st. There were 40 businesses from the industry that were represented and about 300 students that were able to get out or get resumes out and talk to potential employers on the next phase of their life. Their next event will be Hard Hats, Hammers, and Hot Dogs on April 10th. Thank you guys again.
Okay, thank you. Lake City High School, I'll have you guys go next.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, superintendent Cook, and district administration. My name is Emily Damshin, and I'm the ASB secretary at Lake City High School. Also with me tonight are ASB president Jacob Baker, ASB vice president Sam Putrin, and ASB treasurer Carter Gordon. In college and career news, Lake City invited students to take the ASVAB earlier this morning. Students who participated in the proctored test will have the opportunity to interpret their results with an expert trained in the ASVAB Career Exploration Program. We're also hosting a dual credit application day on March 13th for sophomores interested in participating in dual credit during their junior and senior years. This will help to expedite the process for registration and allow students to have earlier conversations with their counselor and college and career advisors about their future plans. With over 50 organizations confirmed, the Now and Next Summit Info Night on March 16th will be the largest inclusive college and career-focused spring event within the district, and it is open to 9th through 12th grade students and families across the region. There will also be a breakout session specifically geared toward middle school students interested in participating in advanced opportunities. Finally, on March 20th, Lake City is hosting a career and technical education roadshow, which will showcase over 50 transfer and career professional programs in an interactive way. Industry partners have also been invited to participate, and students and staff are very excited about having this opportunity on our campus. In activities news, LC will be hosting the annual Math is Cool competition on Friday, March 20th, and will also be holding a March Madness Bubble Soccer tournament on Monday, March 23rd from 5 to 7 p.m. Our spring parent-teacher conferences will be on Wednesday, March 25th from 4 to 7 p.m. We also wanted to congratulate our wrestling team for placing 5th at state, which is the best showing in school history, and our two state champions, Matthew Whitcomb and Owen Hughes. Our boys basketball team is also going to state at the end of this week, and our play, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, is running now, led by the wonderful Mrs. Seaton. Finally, we are so proud to announce that we have 2 students at Lake City High School who are among the 15,000 students nationwide to be chosen as National Merit Finalists, Alex Gary and Karina Magnus. These two exceptional students now have the chance to be selected as part of the 7,500 students who become Merit Scholarship winners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you. And last, I'll have Coeur d'Alene High School come up.
Superintendent Cook, Chairman Morrisroe, and other esteemed members of the board, thank you for having us here today. My name is Megan Corrett, and with me is ASB Vice President Parker Drexel and ASB Secretary Ashley Murphy. In February, we finished up with Wish Week. It was the 24th through the 28th. Essentially, Wish Week is a way that we like to provide a member in our community with fulfilling their Make-A-Wish. So the person for this Wish Week was Eloise. She's a 3-year-old, and her older sister actually goes to Coeur d'Alene High School. She's diagnosed with a cancerous brain tumor, and her wish week is to go to Sesame Street. So we had a spirit week for her and sold t-shirts to raise money for her to go to Sesame Street. So that was a really cute one, and all of our whole school had a lot of fun with that. We also just finished up with a state. A lot of people were at state this last weekend. We had Student Council State, DECA State, and we have 26 members of DECA who will be attending Nashville, Tennessee. And then we also had our girls basketball team go to state, as well as our boys wrestling team, who placed 4th. We also had 2 championships from boys wrestling, including Gunnar Julio and Drew Roberts, so we're very proud of them. Our Sources of Strength is doing a lot, and they have started doing lunches every Wednesday. So they set up a picnic in the Commons right now, but when it's warmer, it'll be moved outside, and it's just a way for students to have a place to go at lunch and just be involved with other members of our school. And tomorrow, we'll be wearing blue to support Sources of Strength and raise awareness for healthy activities. So our school will be participating in that tomorrow. Upcoming, we have prom on April 11th, Buff and Tough, which is our boys volleyball tournament, on April 15th, Sunrise Sunset, which is a father-daughter, mother-son dance, on April 16th, sorry. And then also next week, we have BPA going to state. We'd like to invite you to join us for our theater production of Mary Poppins, which will be playing on April 23rd through 25th, April 29th through May 22nd. So we'd all love you guys to come see that. They all do a really good job, and it's a lot of fun. And then another big thing that we have coming up is the Viking County auction on March 14th. Student Council has put in 12 baskets, and many of our other sports and activities have done so as well. And it's a great way for us to raise money for our programs. So we'd like to invite you all to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'll invite up Kim Ziegler with the Coeur d'Alene Education Association for their report. Good evening, Kim.
Good evening.
Don't
I'd
feel
love
bad.
to
It
think
always
that they're
happened with
standing
Bruce.
for me, but they're really not. All right. Good evening, Board Chair Morrisroe, esteemed members of the board, Superintendent Cook, Ms. Town, district employees, and the public. Once again, I'd like to thank you for having me present this evening. I have for you 2 celebrations from our Woodland Middle School. You may have noticed that a lot of my presentations come from the middle schools. They are doing some amazing work in our district, and I'm certain that the elementary and high schools are as well, but they don't answer my emails, so. The first celebration comes to you from the 6th grade social studies educators at Woodland. Their students have had a blast traveling virtually with virtual reality goggles to experience the ancient civilizations they study in social studies. This fall, students toured a prehistoric campsite from the Mesolithic era, the Great Pyramids of Giza, tombs of ancient pharaohs, as well as a trip down the Nile River to experience the daily life and from the perspective of an ancient Egyptian. Virtual reality has promoted curiosity and wonder and has given the 6th graders an opportunity to explore places without ever leaving the classroom. These educators would like to thank the Excel Foundation for accepting their Globe Trekking Around the World grant. This grant has brought their social studies curriculum to life and created dynamic experiences for their students. My next celebration comes to you from Woodland and from our Lisa Wick and Gretchen Bell, who you got to honor this month. These ladies have used the district's professional development funds in order to attend a trauma-informed conference in California this last February. Their takeaways from this conference included understanding that behavior interventions for students must be about what the students really need. We have students that come to our schools hungry and in need of breakfast, or students that are worried about a home situation and cannot concentrate in our classes. Our behavior interventions must identify the root cause of the behavior in order to get the student back into a learning mindset. The greatest takeaway from this conference included understanding the foundation of family involvement and the importance of that inside of our classrooms. As educators, we can help parents be a part of the education process. A great reminder from these ladies is instead of complaining about a parent not being involved, we need to invite those parents into our rooms and teach them how to be involved. The last takeaway that they shared is one of the most vital. This statement is so simple and yet so important and so impactful. Every child must feel like they belong in your classroom every day. The staff of not only our Boost classrooms, but all of our classrooms do a wonderful job of providing a predictable, nurturing, and consistent environment for our students. Each and every classroom should provide a positive learning experiences where the students feel wanted and welcome. This can extend outside of the classrooms as well. Office staff, bus drivers, paraprofessionals, and administration can also create spaces where students feel necessary and safe. These adults can collaborate together in order to create a caring environment where the student can find success. These ladies would like to thank their administration, the district, and the board for the extra professional development funds that made it possible for them to attend this conference. The last item I have for you this evening is a save the date. Please mark your calendars and clear your agendas for the evening of May the 5th. On this day, we will be celebrating our wonderful educators at the retirement and recognition dinner. We will gather together at 5:30 and dinner will be served at 6. Be prepared to be entertained once again by the great Tony Perka as he MCs the event once again. Your official invitations will come to each of you in April, but I wanted to let you know in advance that you are all invited, and we look forward to celebrating our hardworking and devoted educators. Thank you again for allowing me to present. I'll see you guys in April.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Okay, so public comment. Before we go into that, I need to read my little statement here. I want to remind the public that while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The district does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during the public comment period are limited to one comment not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to present to the board, you may provide those comments in writing to our clerk, Ms. Lynn Town. She will ensure that board members receive the additional commentary. Please keep in mind that board members will not respond to public comment tonight. If I determine that an individual statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate your privilege to address the board. We only have 2 people signed up tonight. I'll keep time up here, and I'll just kind of politely try to ask you to move it along if we get to that point. First up is Liza McNamee. Is that right? Liza, sorry. And if you'll just make sure the light is on there on the mic, I think it sounds like it is.
Okay, I've never done this before. Thanks. Hello. My name is Liza McNamee. I have 3 children in the Coeur d'Alene Public School District. I'm also professionally a statistician. The reason why I'm standing here right now is because I noticed a subtle change in the grandfather policies, and I just wanted to maybe give you some insight on how that subtle change might affect some of your students in the Coeur d'Alene School District. I want to thank all of you for listening to the public at your grandfather open houses. I was present at least 2 of these, and I firmly believe that the grandfather priority should be giving some priority to students who are at the most risk. 18% of kids with learning disabilities drop out of high school. I have been in homes and conferences with families of kids with specific medical needs and learning disabilities. And I feel these kids set up for success have this untapped potential to be tomorrow's inventors and college graduates. I notice a subtle but significant change within the grandfather policies from Dr. Cook's original memo on February 3rd to what was most recently posted on the Coeur d'Alene Boundary website. I realize that these are both drafts, but pretty soon we're going to have an official document. Dr. Cook says under priority level 2, K through 12, special needs, students under IEPs or 504 plans. And then I've heard that this is the current one by contacting people today, that on the Boundary website under priority level 2, third bullet, students with individual education plans or 504 plans in special programs not available at other schools. This policy, as stated, is going to force kids with autism, emotional difficulties, learning disabilities, and other similar conditions to rebuild the supportive relationships with new staff members. The services are available at all schools. It's not the services which are the issue here, but rather the security that comes from the established relationships with staff and familiarity of surroundings. It will not be in the interest of these students to force them to move schools. Families with the guidance from their schools should be granted some, but not total liberty in these special cases to do what is best for their children and their siblings. Please consider adjusting the current grandfather priority to allow children with 504s and IEPs to have some level of priority to remain in their current schools, even if the new schools have the programs available. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Okay, thank you. And next up is Rebecca Schroeder. Good evening.
Good evening, Superintendent Cook, Chairman Morris Rowe, esteemed trustees. Ms. Town, I appreciate the opportunity to just bring some information to the board this evening and the public as well. I'm the executive director of a nonpartisan group called Reclaim Idaho that's working on a statewide ballot initiative that would increase funding to our Idaho public schools. We are the group that worked to put Medicaid expansion on the ballot in the last election. Now we have our sights set on Idaho's public education funding. Personally, to me, I've lived in Coeur d'Alene here for the last 15-ish years, educated at University of Idaho, grew up in Kuski, Idaho, 8 miles from where I grew up. After failure to pass their levy, the middle school in Kamiah just closed as a result of that. And, it would be really wonderful if our supplemental levies were in fact supplemental and not such a vital portion of our school funding. So this statewide ballot initiative would give all voters around the state, the opportunity to have a say on this additional $200 million annually that would go to earmarked uses for our most urgent needs in our Idaho public schools. Things like reducing class sizes, attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers, teacher salaries, classroom materials like textbooks, career technical education, full-day kindergarten, and programs like art, music, drama, and special education services. The money would be in its own special account called the Quality Education Fund, not the general fund of the legislature, and distributed on a per-student basis, regardless of where you live around the state. So for a district like the Coeur d'Alene School District with approximately 11,000 students, that would mean $6.6 million annually in additional funds that would be coming to the district through this measure. The funding mechanism for this initiative is basically reversing some big tax cuts given by the legislature in the last several years. 95% of Idahoans would not see any change in their rates. It would impact individuals who make more than $250,000 annually, a very modest rate on monies over that amount. And for families, it would be monies over $500,000. So less than 4% of Idahoans would be impacted by that. We also restore the corporate rate to what it was before many cuts, from 6.925% back to 8% for corporations that file their taxes as a C corporation. So big corporations like Walmart and McDonald's. These are not our small businesses in Idaho. So I just urge you to please consider what this could mean, not only for a district like ours, but a lifeline for small towns like where I grew up around the state. I have information about the initiative with a website where you can read the policy in its entirety. I put my phone number on there as well because I live here locally and I care about this. I'm having wonderful conversations, doing a lot of door knocking, making significant progress toward our 55,000 signatures that we need statewide to qualify this for the ballot. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that'll close public comment and we'll move on to our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items A through I?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I just want to point out, I think this was new this month, but we've separated consent action versus consent information items. So these are the consent action items. And it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Ms. Town, I assume we don't need to do anything on the information items, is that correct? Okay. So we're going to move on to our finance report. And we have Dr. Cook filling in for Katie today. He's pinch hitting for Katie.
Katie, I know you're not watching this, and you'd better not watch the recording. So, good evening. I am going to present the state revenue update, and this is actually a really good time to do that. As you know, February 15th is when we have a pretty good idea of how the funding is going to come in for the year, and I'm going to do my best to emulate Katie in that presentation. The foundation payment, we are pretty locked in on the February 15th payment, and we have a pretty good idea of what we'll be getting based upon our units and our discretionary funding, not necessarily transportation funding, but the reason this matters and why the timing on this is so important is it gives us a good picture of the finish line and how well we've done at back about this time last year at speculating on what we thought attendance would look like and what the budget would look like as based upon that. And the good news is Katie is a rock star. Salary-based apportionment, as you know, is essentially about half of our general fund budget, and it's over 70% of the money that we get from the state when it comes to funding our budget. Discretionary funding is about 20%. And we base those two on the best 28 weeks of attendance and the average daily attendance early on in the school year. And so the very first look on those, and I'm going to fly through these slides, we speculate on those budgets, the amount we think we're going to get. So here's our here's our actual budget funding, the way it looks like when it comes from the general fund. You can see right now, almost 70% of our money that we pay out is based upon our salary-based apportionment. Discretionary funding comes up for about 1/4, and then transportation makes up about 3.4%. So if you add those all together, those are the things we're updating at this point, and that's how much that we are having to speculate when we set the budget back in about May is when we speculate that, and then you guys approve that in June. And the salary-based apportionment, I'm going to do my best on this. I've been here almost 2 years now. Should have this figured out. A salary-based apportionment is a formula that is determined by the average cost of a teacher in our school district that is funded by the state, also multiplied by the amount of students that they calculate being the number of students that you would appoint to a class at any given level. And that formula is modified if you're in kindergarten. I think it's 1 per 40. And then it goes down to about one per 18 to 20, and that's what's funded by the state. And so when we start talking salary-based apportionment, we have to figure out what we think the number of teachers we're going to have, the average years of service, and the education attainment that they've each gotten, and then multiply that factor by those that formula. Then you also have to carve out if we've got any teachers that aren't currently certified in our staff. That can often happen in times like now when you have a teaching shortage. Those teachers, if they don't obtain their certification during that time, you can lose that from that funding from the state. And right now we believe that we have 2 of those. But we also think that by the end of the year, one of those will get added back in, and that's about a $90,000 shortfall that we anticipate that we'll be seeing. So here's the numbers based upon the answers that we've been given on the February 15th deadline. This figure is actually, we budgeted $14.4 million based upon the State Department numbers. We got 14.6 based upon the support units. And, oh no, that's not what I meant to say. Salary-based apportionment, excuse me, 34.2 based upon the budget. We were almost exactly right, spot on that payment, 34.185. All of that adds out to just under $200,000 in addition to more than what we budgeted. If you back out that $90,000, that moves us right into the mark that we were in. Discretionary funding is not based on the first 10 weeks. Discretionary funding is based upon the best 28 weeks of attendance. And the best 28 weeks is always a little shorter than the first 10 weeks. And so when we estimated and built this budget, we estimated the first 10 weeks, it would have been 515.88. The final July payment that we're expecting to get will actually be at 507.56. And so the good news on this is that when you look at the projections, here we go. Oh, she didn't put it on there. We budgeted, one back? So on about a $60 million payment from the state, our budget difference was about $21,000. We budgeted at 515.55, and a February payment came in at 515.88. And we may still get some slight modification in transportation between now and the end of the year. But the good news is that, and I think this is important to note for future reference, is that as we tweak and dial in on the budgeting, we're trying to do our best to formulaically track the growth of the support units over time, especially if we continue with this model right now, with this funding model, and it appears in all practical purposes that the legislature has established that this is the direction they intend to go, that the continued work that we're doing to look long-term over trend data is on the right path. And if you remember last spring, we talked quite a bit about how we wanted to speculate the increase in salary-based apportionment for budget building, and we actually estimated 2 salary-based units higher than we thought that we should, and as it turns out, it seems that that was very much the right decision to make. And so just kudos to Katie on that. I just want to make sure that I call her out while she's on vacation, that is just, she just nailed it. She did a really nice job on that. So any questions?
You got to pass.
Any questions I can write down for Katie when she gets back? All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to action items. And our first action item up here is the profile of the graduate. And are you taking this, Dr. Cook, or is this Katie?
Was Kate going to take this? Yeah. So this has been out for public review for 30 days, and I think we're at a point now where we'd like to ask for approval on this.
Yeah, so my confusion. I made Kate come up and probably didn't need to. So that's right, we had this last month for information. And no comments received, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So really, we're just moving this to action. Before we do that, is there any comments or questions that you have for Dr. Cook? Okay, so we had a motion in the agenda there, and it is just a motion to approve the portrait of a graduate as presented. Anyone? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you. Sorry, Kate. Okay, next up is, and Dr. Cook was maybe a segue for this, but budget hearings. We already have to start thinking about that and looking forward into that. And so these are the budget hearings we do in June. So Ms. Town, anything you need to add on that?
No, I spoke with Katie. She and I came up with these options for you to consider, all of them on Mondays, which is typical. All of them meet the criteria of the statute for the timing of the hearings and the adoption.
Okay, so they gave us 3 options there, and there's pretty specific wording that's in the board packet. I think those options, any of those work for the finance department. It was kind of based on our schedule. They weren't sure if some of us were going to be away or those sorts of things. I think their preference, my guess with Katie not being here, would be option 3, just because that gives her another week to continue to work on things, since it's so late that she gets numbers and then has to put this all together. So does anyone have a conflict with that? Okay, does someone want to read that motion that's in the packet and insert option 3?
I move to approve option 3, June 22nd. Don't you want me to read that part? For the budget hearing, and June 29th for the budget adoption at a special meeting to take place prior to the regular July meeting. Is that right?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. More fun stuff here. This is kind of some housekeeping stuff going into that budget work. There will be a finance committee, and that's made up of some district admins, some CEA folks, and a board representative or 2. I think we've done it both ways in the past. We've had 1 or 2 representatives. So we are looking for a volunteer, or we get to nominate someone for that.
You've done a good job.
Nice. Is that Finance Committee? Oh, I don't want to do negotiations. It's going to be a hard negotiation here. I'll do it reluctantly.
I think there was two of us.
I think we've had two on finance, for sure.
I know that we both did the negotiations.
Oh, we did two on negotiations. I'll do negotiations. And so if I'm doing negotiations, I want to do finance. Does anyone else want to do finance? Okay. Do we have to make a motion on that, Ms. Town?
Yes, I've listed motions for both.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone?
Did you say you wanted?
Oh, I'll do it.
Did you say you'll do both?
Well, if you're asking me to do
hand in hand.
negotiations, which I have the last couple of years, then I would like to do finance.
Okay, I
Because
just wanted to make
they
sure
work
I
together.
heard you correctly.
I think it's important whoever does it does both. Because
Okay.
you're working with a lot of the same people.
Then I'll do a motion to assign Casey Morris-Rowe as board representative to the negotiations IBB team, and a motion to assign Casey Morris-Rowe as the board representative to the finance committee.
Can we- Okay, that's one motion? Okay,
Yes.
Second.
okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, thanks.
So excited.
Okay. And next, we've got policies for action. We saw these three policies last month. They were out for public comment. Looks like one of them, I think it was open enrollment, had a couple comments received. The other two did not. So why don't we take these one at a time? So is there a motion to approve 3001P as presented? You have questions on that one? That's enrollment qualifications. It was entrances, I think is what it was called before, but it's enrollment qualifications. Okay, so is there a motion to approve that one?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion on 3001P? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The next one, we'll make a motion and then we can go into discussion on it, which is 3010P and 3010F, open enrollment. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on this one?
I have discussion
Okay,
in
good.
our
Me too.
notes. If you look, I had sent a comment about that section, and as I understood, there was a revised clarification to change policy 3103. I had asked if we were giving, if you read the section about prior students, it qualified it with whose siblings attend the school in number 2. So as I understand, based on the board question notes, now there's 6 preferences listed. 1 is the same. 2 now reads students who enrolled the prior year under open enrollment at requested school and reside within the district boundary with no qualifier. 3 now reads students who were enrolled in the prior year under open enrollment at requested school and reside within the district boundary whose siblings attend the school. And then 4, 5, and 6 are the same that had been in there. So I would like to see that adjustment made to the policy and would amend it to that.
And is that the order you'd put them in, or would
Yes.
that? And I guess I'm trying to figure out where these are in the policy. Those are the preferences or the
So if you
prioritization.
Yeah, they are, if you go to 310, page 3, at the bottom, it says in situations where openings are limited, the superintendent or designee may give priority to certain students. And then there's another sentence, and then it lists 1 through 5. Keep going. It's 310. Yeah, keep going. Don't stop. All right, there, the bottom. Yeah, 310. No, keep going. Yeah, page 3. It's at the bottom of page 3. So right there, there's 5, but number 2 has the qualifier of whose siblings attend the school. So what the proposal in the board questions section that was put in there today takes 2 and removes the qualifier at the end, whose siblings attend the school, makes 2 into 3, and then you have 4, 5, and 6 are 3, 4, and 5.
In other words, it gives, if a student is open enrolled to a school and there's space, they would receive that prioritization as a current student going into the following year. And then students of siblings would be the priority the following year. So it just places the priority of a student that is currently attending.
Yeah, I had the same question but I viewed it a tiny bit different. You separated it, but my question was, is it confusing number 3? I think it was confusing how 2 and 3 were together, so I like how we've separated them. But it still is a little bit confusing because what we want to give preference to is the new sibling that's attending who currently has a student attending. Does that make sense? So now it says students who were enrolled the prior year under open enrollment at the requested school and reside, and then whose siblings attend the school. Aren't we trying to give preference to the new student who will be enrolling, who had a sibling the prior year, who enrolled through open enrollment? Is that what that's trying to say? I think that's a little bit confusing. I think it was really confusing when they were stuck together in the same number, but I think it just needs to clarify that we're giving preference to the new student who is attending who has a current sibling. And I think with the way that's punctuated, it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I'm a little confused on your write-up, I guess, there as well. Because it seems
That
like if
wasn't
you
my
were...
write-up.
Oh.
So you know, that was my question, but
Oh.
somebody else's write-up.
It seems like anyone who'd fall under 3 also falls under 2. I guess
2 is just, if you are open enrolled to the school, you're going to be prioritized the next year.
Right, and 3 is you're open enrolled to the school, you're prioritized. And you have isn't it covering the same people, except they also have siblings, right?
That's what Lisa's trying to clarify.
To me, like everyone who's in 3 is already in 2.
No, because it's talking
That's how I
about,
read it.
it's just now you're joining in the new sibling, so you're giving, and essentially they are kind of one and the same because they both have to reapply every year through this open enrollment policy, but it's giving preference then, if there's space, you let sibling A in who's in 3rd grade, you have a kindergarten who's registering, and giving them preference because they have a sibling who's in 3rd grade. Correct me, Jen, if that's not what you were.
Well, I think it's both, Lisa. I agree that we want to give preference if there's siblings already there, but I also think because it's open enrollment every year, say the 3rd grader gets in, but the 2nd grade, you've got to make some selections, even though that 2nd grader was previously enrolled, so that gives them one priority, but also having the sibling adds the 2nd priority. So I think you have, and maybe we need to break it out into 2 different, that says one is if they have a sibling there, they stay together as priority, or if there's one already enrolled from the prior year and a new one's coming in, they're a part of that priority. I think my understanding of, at least my opinion, is both of those should have priority in this list.
So I guess the way I read it, just to add to the confusion, is that the new student, so say your kindergartner's coming in, is covered under 5. Right, that they reside outside of the district boundary, but their siblings attend the school. Because number 3 is students who were enrolled the prior year, and the kindergartner wasn't enrolled the prior year, right? You're right. Okay. let's think on that for a minute. Is there other comments on this one?
I had another general comment, and Liza, you're still sitting here, so you can, but I listened to your comments, and I've listened to read some of the feedback that you sent, and I wonder if your concerns were regarding open enrollment policy and not grandfathering. And so at reading our new open enrollment policy, we don't have any protections for those students who have open enrolled and who are currently on 504s or IEPs. And so I am requesting that we do embed some priority for students who have open enrolled, who have been placed on plans, and let's say they've been in the school 3 or 4 years, they have a plan in place, that they also get some protection. You know, they'll get it because they were there the prior year, but do they deserve more protection because of the plan in place? And there's nothing in here about that right now, and so I don't know if it could be with 3 or 2 or where it falls, but if we're giving preference to that in the grandfathering, I wonder if it needs some sort of discussion in here. I don't know.
I think for me, I guess I want to see that and know a little more before I'd say yes, that's needed or not needed.
I think the question would come in.
Or how is it worded? So I don't know. You know, maybe we need to hold off on this policy for a month. I have got something to a change on this, but
Okay. Yeah, I think I want to make sure I've got all your comments down first before we.
Well, I had commented on the varsity sports, and the reference in the response was to, it's under 3210, page 2. Well, it says it's recommended a student who is considering submitting, look at all the rules. My question was, if you are already an athlete under open enrollment, is that going to be set as a priority? And so I wanted it discussed, because I don't think varsity sports telling the student to look into it is addressing my question. So I do think we want to talk some more. And maybe nobody else thinks it should be a priority, but I know there were several parents that commented about that before too.
yeah, that was one that I had notes on here from our grandfathering discussion. I think that came up quite a bit, and just talking with the principals afterwards about, okay, what is the practice and what do you do? To me, it makes sense at the high school level that once you open enroll, that you get to stay. You don't have to open enroll every year at the high school level, because there is so many complications from whether it's eligibility or scheduling or program, you know, those sorts of things that it would make sense to me at the high school level that it's kind of a one in. Once you're in, you're in.
For everybody, not just athletes.
I would, yeah, for sure. I wouldn't be comfortable with just athletes. I would say for everybody.
Is that a feasible way to go, Dr. Cook? Do you think now that our high schools are emerging and they're going to be more crowded than ever, is that something that we could provide that could sort of?
Yeah, I think there's language that gives us the authority in odd cases to do emergency types of situations based upon attendance. So that language is already in existence. And I think we would all believe that the intent of, especially in high school, is once you're in, you're in. And if we hold on to that language for in rare instances or exceptions, we would have to do certain things that we wouldn't ever want to talk about, things like running double enrollment and 4 tracks and those things if we ever got that crowded. But I think capturing some language that essentially brings in the idea that once you're in at the high school level is very reasonable. And I think we could probably come up with something like that. I don't know about that it's based on the sports aspect of it. It's just, it gets more complicated when you're involved in sports, because hopping from high school to high school, which you're very willing and able to do if that's your choice and if you want to do that, but you're going to have some eligibility issues if you're a varsity athlete, and it's going to impact your seasons. So, but I think the idea of trying to give people the intent of once you're in, you're in. I don't anticipate that being. I think it's even in here in some regards that we intend to try to be hands-off except for when need is necessary. But a sentence to qualify that is, we wouldn't be opposed to that.
well, no, this part, I had a different question about the open enrollment policy and just kind of clarifying it for the community, because I think there is some confusion or misperception, open enrollment policy versus grandfathering, because we're having a transition year for many elementary students. And so I think being really clear that grandfathering, and if you're interpreting this different, please let me know, but grandfathering is in regards to those students who will be asked to transfer to a new school. And open enrollment is going to be in regards to those students who have open enrolled in a school, irregardless of whether their boundary has changed. And so I think I would just like to hear your thoughts on that, really being clear about what qualifies as an open enrollment request and what is qualifying as a grandfathering request, because they're different.
They're very, very different. And I think that's part of why this is confusing. And then to also exacerbate that difference is the fact that we're moving from this kind of general once in, always in across some of our schools, our elementary schools specifically, to this model of attendance zoned schools are prioritized. And attendance zone schools becoming prioritized means that the guarantee is if you live in a zone and you want to go to that school, you have that right. It also means that open enrolled students no longer can be guaranteed once in, always in. I do think once we're at the high school level, that's something we can accommodate. But as a general rule, the idea of if you are in an elementary school, which is I think how we've been living for at least the last couple of years, if we're going to move to this, you now have the authorization to always go to your home attendance zoned school. Those two things flip on priorities. And so that creates a transitional period in which people are going to ask to be grandfathered, in which we're going to talk about later tonight, some prioritizations. And then that actually, I'm using the word priority here a lot, that actually will have priority over then open enrollment procedures, because we're going to have to do whatever accommodations we're going to have to make for grandfathering will have to take place prior to open enrollments being accessed by folks, because we'll have some places where we'll have space, but we want to give those prioritizations to grandfathering first, which is right back to what you said, Trustee May, that students who wish to remain in their current set of circumstances rather than being moved to the new school that we would be zoning them for, versus open enrolling, which is I'm currently in a homeschool I don't wish to attend and I would like to attend something else.
I think communication with families sooner rather than later that really says, this is, what the model looks like. And, if you choose, you're assigned, you're going from school A to school B, you can apply for grandfathering it. If that doesn't work out, if you choose to go to the open enrollment track, then it's a different, box that you need to move to. You can go on your flow chart, because I think there will be parents who have a hard time distinguishing between our grandfathering model and our open enrollment, and I think there will be frustration because many people may choose to open enroll or attempt to next year. And I think you're right that there could be some limitations in how much open enrollment we can accommodate, but moving to that right flow chart is going to be important, and it's going to be confusing.
Yeah, there's a definite algorithm to all of this, and the first one is getting the zones, whatever those may be, and we'll present those later tonight, approved by the board, so that we now have and know this population of essentially impacted students that we know we are going to be theoretically displacing due to the changing zones. And those students have to be placed somewhere. Additionally, magnet school, 2 of our schools, elementary schools, are magnet schools that will be going through their enrollment process that will also be impacting a total student population. After we get this displaced group and we know these are our students, these 400 or so or 500 students, that step will be to get our magnet schools filled up with students that know they want to go to those magnet schools. Then we'll start placing those students accordingly, and that's what gives us the ability to determine who and when we can grandfather. And it will likely be that some students will be grandfathered. There won't be equal distribution of grandfathering because it depends on the space that is in each grade level and classroom.
Something else I had on this policy, and I think it was from that grandfathering night with a discussion I had with Principal Clifford and maybe Miss Barrett as well, about about kind of losing your open enrollment status. And it's a little vague in there, kind of what circumstances can cause that, or it's really broad, I guess. And the discussion we had that night was just about, that we insist you show up and you participate and you have passing grades and those sorts of things, that it's potentially another tool, I'll call it a tool instead of a hammer, to use with students who are maybe struggling a little bit, to say, hey, we've allowed you to come to this school by choice. We need you to be here and we need you to participate. And so I don't know if that's something we want to look at, being more specific about, how you could lose or, lose the right for that open enrollment request. And that's more mid-year, right, that I'm talking about.
So we put in a revocation of transfer in 3010 on page 4, which gives administration the authority to pull open enrollments either because of resource limitations or because of the burden that's being created. If you want us to explicitly call out, things like behavior, attendance, or poor academics as a rationale, we can do that. I think that the revocation of transfer, the way it's written right now, gives us that authority, but if you want us to get more explicit with it, we could.
For many different reasons, but if we're putting stipulations on struggling students as it is and they have a hiccup and we force them back to another high school, is that causing more trauma? Are we going to lose those students in the end anyway? I do worry that we're kind of dooming them to, and I get what you're saying, that they should be held accountable, and if they're going to be approved for an open enrollment or a transfer, they should live up to the expectation of all of our students. But I think what's good for one student should be good for all of our students, whether they've open enrolled or not.
I do think that if we intend to give the authority to a student by saying, especially at the high school level, that once in, always in at the high school level, that it's not necessarily incongruent to say, however, our policies are extremely important to us and we would expect you to live by them, or something that gives teeth to that. This would qualify the way it's written right now. There's enough teeth in it the way it's written. But if you want us to add some in essence, some assurance to parents and students that we're going to live by this expectation that once you get into our high schools, we're going to try and see you through that and give you that commitment, I wouldn't necessarily think it's a bad idea to say it's important that you follow the policies, though, once you're... And is that any different than... Do we need to call that out here for an open enrolled student and remind them any differently than we would for any other student? I don't know.
On that page, it says violation of the
We've got that.
Okay, so do we want to approve this? Jen has an edit for an ad. Lisa talked about an ad. I think a couple of us nodded our heads in regards to kind of granting at the high school level that it would continue. Can we wing that together here at the table, or do we want to pull this for a month? And is that okay? Is it going to impact us to pull that for a month?
I don't anticipate. Well, we've got open enrollment policies now.
I guess we'd live by the current policy.
Yeah.
Right.
There is going to be at some point, and maybe we do bring this back. We could bring this back in March when we make the decision on the boundaries, if you wish. But I think I think we could have it together in 2 weeks. I'm a little nervous about the IEP 504 designation as it stands alone, because I'm a little worried about writing language that could potentially become discriminatory, and qualifying somebody as having a different set of rights based upon their disability might not fly legally. I'm a little nervous about that. But we can definitely look into it.
Are we going to be giving some of those same rights to our grandfathering students, though? I mean, we're giving some of the, that's in the grandfathering policy that we're going to approve tonight. So I hear what you're saying on that. I think if it's 2 students and one student's been there for 3 years and they've got a plan in place, and it's a hard question. And I'm not saying I know the answer, but I think it might warrant more discussion or looking into.
Yeah, there is some hurry here to get this, but it wouldn't have to be done tonight unless you guys want to try and hammer out the language, and I'm fine with us taking a shot at it.
I also have faith that the principals are probably doing the right thing, and they're making all of those risk assessments, and when they make decisions on open enrollment, they're taking all of these unique situations for every student into account. So I just think it's something that we haven't talked about, and because it's in our grandfathering policy, I wondered if we needed to consider it here.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
why
I
don't
want to
we
make
pull
sure
this
I've
one?
got the language that each of you are dialed in on. First of all, clarity on number 3, on the new number 3, right? Okay. The IEP 504 clarification. Once in, always in, at the high school level of something like that.
And should that extend to middle school too? It's 3 years. I mean,
I wouldn't recommend it at this point. Let us play with this language and see what you think. I think one of the things that we're working towards, and we'll show you this later tonight, is this setting up the district long term for a feeder model that would essentially create the K-12 pathway for a student in the very near future, presumptively, and that would then potentially you could even argue that once into a system of K-12, whether it's elementary, middle, or high, you're creating that boundary. But then you've also got to make sure that you're not tying your hands when it comes to enrollment decisions. But I think high school stands separately than middle school because of the eligibility issues, and I think that's very relevant. And at this point, because of programming, there's lots of reasons why that seems quite logical. Anything else? Did I miss any? I want to make sure I've got those 3. Okay.
I would just, on the once in, always in, that maybe we look at language of, but this is a privilege, not a right.
Yeah.
And, you need to behave.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll either see that again on March 18th, or we'll wait till our April meeting if they need a little more time. Okay. And then I got to back up and get on the right page. The third one here was 3330P, student discipline, and there was some new language added there. Oh.
We had a motion and a second on 32.
Oh, you're right.
Ms. Bromley, would you like to withdraw your motion?
Yes, only because Casey made me make it.
That's what we're supposed to do to go into the discussion. I rarely do that. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Town, for keeping me straight. All right. Now we can move on? All right. 3330P, student discipline. We had some new language there. We saw this last month. It's been out for public comment, none received. Is there a motion to approve 3330P as presented? Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on this one? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. Okay. We are cruising right along here. And
This is me too.
yeah, this is you. So we're moving on to information items, the district attendance zone recommendations, and these are for information. And we'll see these back. We have a special meeting on March 18th to consider these for action. And Mr. Voller is out ill this evening, so Dr. Cook's gonna take this one.
Not sure it's legal to pinch hit for two different players in the same game. All right, good evening. As we begin this conversation, I just would like to draw attention to the fact that this is maybe a summary of the work that we've done for the last about 6 months. There's a lot of information that has been talked about in this room and other rooms specifically to this. And anybody that has question, if you're either tonight or if you're online watching, one thing I want to draw attention to is everything we're talking about tonight is available on our website. And so if there are questions, please do not hesitate to go there to start. As you know, about 7 months ago, we contracted with Flow Analytics and asked them to answer some questions for us. They provided 5 different pieces of information for us. The first one is they gave us enrollment forecasts for the next 10 years. Secondly, they built a study for us that focused on the growth and development of our district, specifically, mostly the west side, north and west side of our district. And gave us some details on how that growth will happen and helped us get much more accurate information and dialed in on how we speculate the number of students that we get from specific kinds of growth and development across our community. Thirdly, they did a siting analysis for us in which they told us these are the places that you're going to want to build your schools and look at those areas because this is where your students are going to be coming from over the next 10 to 15 years. Fourth, they helped coordinate a community-wide survey to give us information about what our community feels and thinks about how our boundaries should look in the very near future, and actually extending out for many, many years to come in the future. And then last but not least, they gave us a tool that we still are using quite a bit right now to do residency forecasting and how we can build our school system over the next 10 years to reflect the growth that's happening in our community. And I think all 5 of those things are what we use to help navigate the decisions that you're going to hear from us, or the recommendations on the decisions you're going to hear from us tonight. And before I start, I do want to recognize that we had 38 community members that participated in this work, both staff of the district and community members that gave, I can't even begin to capture. I've talked to several of them who have said, and they said literally hundreds of hours. We asked 8 meetings out of them and 2 community meetings. And some members spent many, many hours looking through maps and looking for solutions and trying to meet the needs that we put out 6 or 7 months ago with the guiding principles. So just a public shout out to all the members of the committee that spent such a tremendous amount of their time and effort in helping us find these decisions. We took a model out to the community back in January and got pretty significant feedback from it that that's all I got on my present. Oh, okay. So it's just me. I have 2 slides and it was my committee members. All right. I got you, Seth. Thank you. One of the things that we emphasized was trying to meet all of the needs that were identified in the guiding principles. It became clear very quickly that those were contradictory to one another. And so after the community meeting, the very first community meeting in which we took out the very first kind of put together map, 3 things came out very clearly, and I want to bring attention to those. And that is walkability and how important it is for kids to be able to get to schools specifically that they would be attending. Secondly, this idea or concept of a neighborhood school and what that meant. And thirdly, this something that would become some form of a predictable feeder system. The second that we made the decision that based upon feedback both from that community meeting, from the feedback we got from the survey, and then from a workshop we did with the board, it became very clear that those were going to become our guiding principles that we spent the most time on. And to some extent, that caused some sacrifice on other guiding principles. One of them that you may have seen, we asked community members who didn't necessarily agree with final votes if they had something that they didn't want to agree with, they wanted to submit a minority report. You got some of those minority reports in which there might have been some frustration, for example, that we weren't able to do as much equity work about balancing all the SES of this elementary school specifically. You'll see in our models tonight that we did very well at balancing the SES of the high schools, did not as well with the elementary schools. And I think that's going to be a future point of discussion as well. I think thirdly, I would like to say that we also found that we had some opportunity to resolve some things with magnets and how magnets are impacting other schools. And one of the recommendations you're going to see from us tonight is to do some further research on the southeast corner of our district, on the elementary schools in the southeast, specifically because there's a lot of schools, a lot of smaller schools with smaller enrollment in a very dense kind of area in the southeastern portion of our district. And how those all interact became quite a energized discussion, and how we move forward with that. I think you're going to see us have a lot more discussion around that. The fourth thing I would like to say is that we're also going to give you a very solid recommendation that we need to speed up any processes we can to create an additional elementary school in our district and an additional middle school, not necessarily in that order. But both of those things came out very, very clearly. All right. Before I move to the maps, I want to make sure you've got handouts that we've provided for the recommendations. We're going to actually give 3 recommendations tonight for your consideration and to take public comment on for the very near future. And those 3 recommendations are to accept this map for the elementary schools for the 2021 school year, this map for the high schools for the 2021 school year, and to hold off on any recommendations for the middle school. And I'm going to go into detail on each of those as we move forward. So I'm going to have to move around to the front to kind of talk that through. Before I move, is there any questions on background and getting us up to this discussion to this point before I move over here and start pointing to maps? All right,
We're going to get you a mic. Oh, you've got it.
Okay, so the second community meeting, we got tremendous feedback from the map that we took to the second community meeting. The map that the committee approved to go into the second community meeting was not extremely popular, but it did receive popular vote. I think the vote on that one was 17-13. Once we got that map in front of the community and got that day, I think we got between that night, we got about 150 comments and about another 70 in the next few days. We incorporated that feedback to the maps, and we have all of that for your consideration. I think it's actually added to your board book. We actually incorporated that feedback to the committee and then took a vote with the committee, and that was the map that was approved 21-9 for your consideration. However, we also asked for the committee's feedback because we knew we had a couple of considerations. Number one, the fact that the middle school map that the community was looking at actually was built with this intention of it being a long-term solution at the middle school level. Because I think the map had about 1,200 students in Woodland Middle School, which was obviously way above their capacity, but it also set the district up in the long term for stabilizing the enrollment at both Canfield and Lakes, and then providing an opportunity for a 4th middle school in the northwest portion of the district to help balance out some of those enrollment capacities that Woodland currently had. And so one of the things we asked the committee was, rather than sending this map that puts Woodland at 1,100, 1,200 students in front of the board, would the committee consider a situation in which we held the middle schools flat until a 4th middle school was built? And they agreed to that. And so that's why there isn't currently a voted on approved map for the middle schools that we would like to pose at this time for the immediate future. There is, however, in work, the committee did a really nice job for a later date for us to present to you proposed maps for what that would look like in the future. Sure.
It gets confusing reading through the minority reports that were submitted and then kind of getting the votes. But so the last recommendation that came to us, the 2.0 modified or whatever we're referring to it as, was that voted on by the committee members?
That was, so yes. So the 2.0 revised was voted on by the committee members and it was approved by the committee.
When was that? When did that happen? Did that happen at their last meeting? Or
That happened electronically prior to their last meeting. At the last meeting, we took 2.0 revised, I think was 2.0, the one that went to the community meeting, revised once it was incorporated, the different, all of the different feedbacks. I think there were 12 points of themes of feedback that we got from the community meeting and the feedback we got online during that window of time. We incorporated them to make 2.0 revised. And that's the model that's actually I've got sitting behind here, because it's not what we're going to recommend. We're actually, the three things we asked that last community meeting, or excuse me, last committee meeting was, number one, are we comfortable with the idea of sitting pat on middle schools until we have a fourth middle school? Because we're so close to capacity for all three of them that we would be essentially shuffling in the short term. You could actually have some impact on SES at the middle schools, but you're also disrupting same things we were just talking about earlier. We're disrupting quite a few students to try to accomplish something that we're going to be undoing with a fourth middle school in the at least reasonable near future, hopefully very near future, as soon as we can. The other thing that we got some tremendous feedback that we weren't finished understanding what was going on in the southeast corner of our school district with regards to elementary boundaries. And so we talked to the committee along with the feedback we got from you guys and the feedback we got from the community, that there's still some things to talk about down here. And the idea that, first of all, this non-contiguous boundaries are creating some circumstances that we need to address that are causing, well, not just causing, but are in the vein of contributing to some SES issues in this location. And so we didn't want to make a decision in which we had to make those changes in such a short period of time, and recognize that we could still move forward with other recommendations on the elementary map while taking some time to slow this down. And so the committee agreed with that portion as well. The idea of, first of all, let's take a little bit of time to talk about Bora, Bryan, Fernan, and see what it is that we can do in the southeast corner of our district to potentially solve those problems. And you can, especially if we go back to those three guiding principles that became priorities, the idea of a walkability, neighborhood schools, and feeders, this becomes something we're going to have to solve, and we're going to have to spend some time working on that. Because, for example, in feeder models that we would talk about in the future, you would see kids in this general location would tend to want to go from elementary school to Canfield because they're just geographically so much closer. Whereas down here, you're more likely to be going to Lakes Middle School. And so what would that look like if we were going to solve that? And then secondly, if we're going to move high school boundaries to this kind of almost vertically split, perfectly down 95 and then Lincoln Way all the way down to the lake, you start to see this geographic split in which Lake City High School takes everything west and everything east goes to CHS. And then you start to build feeder models so that the schools on this eastern half feed into those. Right now, that solution is a very pragmatic and doable solution and sets both schools up for a very nice balanced distribution of our high school students. Over time, this area continues to grow and develop at a faster rate than this area does. So you wind up probably in about 10 years or so needing to come back and revisit this a little bit and talk about what solutions that might be. But our recommendation and the committee's recommendation right now would be to take this high school distribution. You can see currently the or is that the model? Yeah, it is. The current models right now of Lake City High School and CHS right now are in these existing green lines. And so you would see you'd have this area being impacted and this area being impacted as of right now. Also, along with the high schools, we would recommend, and the committee supports the idea of this, of slow rolling this high school boundary change so that freshmen alone are the ones impacted. So just as we were talking about earlier with the open enrollment, the theme or idea that we would like to honor that kids that chose their high school, that we would like to do the best we can to honor that choice. And from then out, now we move our freshman students into their newly zoned high school if this is approved by the board. So let me summarize. The first recommendation, elementary school map, would be to incorporate all of the changes in the boundaries, incorporating NEXA's new physical boundary, and this matched 2.0 revised version that was shared in the community early on, and changes to all of the western elementary schools, but leaving the southeast 25%, if you will, under current boundaries, which actually by that decision also makes Dalton stay the same boundaries. Buy a little time for us to work on this some more and try to point it in the direction long term that solves this complex problem that we need to spend a little bit of time taking it on. But it incorporates new boundaries for Atlas, Skyway, Nexa, and Winton, and Hayden Meadows. Hayden Meadows actually gets back this area that used to be theirs that once we opened Nexa in 16, is that right? Was incorporated into Nexa. So Hayden Meadows gets a slight change to their boundary. That's first recommendation. Second recommendation is we do nothing with the middle schools until we have a fourth middle school. And third recommendation is that we recommend the transition to this vertical division on our high schools starting for the next 2021 school year for freshmen only. Questions?
And just before we go into questions, just reviewing the process so we're all on the same page. So it's come to us, it's for information tonight. Scott's going to communicate this out after this meeting, I believe tomorrow, even though this is all posted on the website, but it's going to get sent out to all of our parents, I believe, in an email format and kind of instructions how they can comment again. And then those comments will come to us. I know they're still working on that, but that comment window will need to close a few, 4, 5, 6 days before our March 18th meeting so they can be bundled up and presented to us prior to that meeting. So that's as far as approvals, that's the way we'll be going. So it'll be on the 18th. It'll come back to us for action. So questions for Dr. Cook?
Dr. Cook, I had a couple questions from community members, and they were curious about when we do adopt the 4 southern schools and Dalton, I guess, would we use the information that flow? Would that be the basis for the recommendation, or is it something that could evolve depending on what is studied or what kind of work is done this year? And same for the middle schools moving forward. Once we know where that 4th middle school is going to be, we'll use some of Flow's information, but most likely it won't obviously represent what's there now.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. There is a model that has been built out that changes this as a potential future option, and we're absolutely going to evaluate that. I think part of what we've got to decide are what became very clear when you talk about the guiding principles, where there are competing priorities about what was the most important. And I think that's part of why we wanted to slow this down and talk this through. There is a model right now that shows different distributions of this, and I'm actually very glad to show it to you. I'd rather not do it tonight because I don't want to confuse people with what model is being recommended by us right now. But I do think for next year, once this is out, then the next step would be to start talking about the models that we would maybe consider over long term, which would include a new elementary model that we do have some great modeling on. We also have a middle school model that shows what it would look like. Actually, we have an elementary and a middle school model that shows both new elementary school and new middle schools baked in that I think we would like to incorporate into our long-range plan that shows the direction we'd like to drive this towards, which also includes in 10 years the fact that if our speculation on enrollment and growth looks like it's going to, even includes some recommendations on the changes that we would recommend for the high school boundaries over time. Eventually, Lake City High, this area is where the growth is happening. And one of the things that we are clear about is schools need to be located where kids are and where they're coming. And so what is becoming extremely clear, if we do nothing and we leave these boundaries as they are recommended right now, these two high schools are within just a few kids of each other. But within 10 years, Lake City High School is back over 2,100 students. And we're going to have to make some recommendations and some changes on that. So not only would we have a new version of elementary schools immediately after we get approved and we can start that conversation, we've got that data ready and right now to go. We also have a map for middle schools to start with, and we also have future maps for the high schools to incorporate into the record so that lots of those conversations can start as soon as we get these next steps. But I think prioritization is, let's get something approved, start getting feedback on what we're recommending so that we can start helping those students get either settled into their new schools or allow them to be grandfathered into their current schools if that's a decision that can be done. And also get NEXA filled out because it's going to be ready to go. And you're going to see some really cool pictures later tonight of how far that's come along. And we want to get that school as full as possible. So when they open up in the fall, that there is a lot of proud students to be going to that school.
And what I think Dr. Cook and I have briefly talked about for that southeast quadrant is let's get these changes behind us, and maybe at our April meeting we put it on an agenda or at our April workshop, and we start talking about, okay, how are we going to redo these boundaries or look at these, for middle school and those, and study that. And we're going to use the same process. We're going to use a committee, a different committee, set a timeline, do those sorts of things. But let's get this behind us, and then we'll kind of set a new charge, like we had a charge with this work, to really dive in more specific on those projects, just so we're not confusing the two.
Right, and that would include a timeline, right, of where we want to be to put those in. I think that's going to be helpful for our families to know, okay, a year from now we want to be implementing that.
And I think, for the committee's benefit, they did spend a lot of time on the southern schools, and some of the feedback that we got, there's terms like lessons learned, and I think there's some good pieces in there that we should remember. So whatever committees put together, I think there's some work that we could use moving forward. And so I think letting them know that this is a starting point and we won't forget all the work that they've done. But I think there was some good information that came from some of the recommendations that I saw. And so I think there was concern that we would be abandoning all of that work that was done. And I hope we're in agreement that there's some valuable input that came out of that committee work. And
I think that's really important for us to acknowledge and recognize that the guiding principles became just such an important part of the conversation, and we wound up so many things were considered to try to solve this, and there's lots of work that potentially could be done here. And one of the things we don't want to lose is, what does the long-term effects look like when you do that? And I think, I don't want to use the metaphor too much, but I think although we're holding tight right now on this area, I don't think that the intention of the committee or of even administration would be to just keep it that way. I think all our recommendation is that this is a temporary solution to give us some time to talk about the needs of this area and how we can make some of those changes over time, and give us a little bit more of a window to do that with really good intention and try to set the district up. And I think part of it is, I've come from, in the districts I've worked in, all of them were built-in feeders. And the benefits that you can get from programming when you have K-12 predictable feeders, and people know, if I go to this elementary school, go to this middle school, I go to this high school, unless I choose differently, that's worth something. But building in all the conversations that we had that we learned from into that process as well, so that you're capturing the best of both of those conversations, I think is really important.
Yeah, I want to say, this was a monumental task, and I think we knew it going in, and it proved to be maybe tenfold of that. I appreciate the time, the hundreds of hours that some of these folks put in. But I think ultimately we've made the right decision, or the recommendations correct, in kind of holding off on the southeast area. It was clear, particularly really in both public committee meetings, that there just wasn't the committee buy-in or community buy-in in that part of town. There were a lot of questions. There were, I think, just work to be done to make sure we're reflecting the community and have that parent buy-in over there. So I appreciate that we were able to kind of do the work but slow down on those. But I agree with what you said, that it's vitally important that we continue to make improvements there, and that that work goes on. On the middle schools, I think it's important that, I think the numbers don't lie, right? That we need a fourth middle school, that's pretty obvious. But it might be a little presumptive to just build a model only in that regard. And so I would just ask that once we do move forward and into that work next year, that we maybe need to look at two scenarios. What if we can build a middle school, and what might it look like if we can't build a middle school? Because I think our current solution isn't a long-term solution, right? We know that. But it could be a force, we could be forced if we run into some trouble getting community support on another middle school. So,
yeah, I think the brutal truth of the answer to that is our recommendation is a fourth middle school. If we were to have to make a different recommendation, the unfortunate truth is that we have very little flexibility in our three middle schools. We're back in the business of bringing portables into locations that maybe the district has just moved portables off. That's one of the things that we learned early on when you start talking about capacities for long-term health of the school ecosystem, and the way that you want to model your schools and the capacity of the schools, so that the educational programming is not harmed by the amount of students that you get. You do actually see a trade-off over time, and I think that's part of what we're trying to acknowledge with this work. This district's done a fantastic job of using its resources to provide its best opportunities for so many kids, and what we're doing now is trying to resource catch up to that. And so putting our schools so that we're not at, and I'm not exaggerating here, literally 100% capacity in almost every school. We could make that work if we had to, but then you're talking about doing it with more mitigation like portables, and you can't make a bigger cafeteria by adding portables. You just add classroom space. So when you wind up with, ask your high school principals what it's like to have 2,000 kids in a cafeteria that's built for a school of 1,600, right? Like you can do it. Of course you can do it, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's compounded by the fact that one of our middle schools is already overcrowded and running portable classrooms, and so our room for expansion leaves us one middle school. And so I think adopting any new middle school boundaries until we can really pinpoint where that fourth middle school is going to be would be difficult, because it is not a long-term solution, not even really a short-term solution.
I will just quickly echo Lisa's comments earlier about using all the data from the committee and what we're going to do with those Southeast schools, because I don't intend to have that be lost. I just think we need to come to a decision on what those boundaries will look like, and the real piece is how do we manage those families in transition, from my perspective, because I think the change is going to happen. I think everybody here, from what I understand, agrees we need contiguous borders and we need a plan moving forward, but it's really what do those look like for those families right now?
And I think, an important piece, Rebecca and I were lucky enough to go do some listening sessions at Bora, Bryan, and Fernan, and it really allowed me to understand the situation from a different perspective or a different lens. And I think we've all come to realize that the conversation is going to turn towards equity, and how do we provide that? It's just not attendance zoning that provides equality in SES. That's checking the box, but really digging into equality for those southern schools is, I think, the next phase of the conversation, and I'm glad that we have a year to really dig into that conversation.
I think one of the things, we put equity as one of our guiding principles, and there's some things that you can do, both subtle and quite overt, to help impact that. But the fact of the matter is that geographically there are things you're bound by certain things in your community that are going to prevent your creating 11 schools with every one of them with 40% free and reduced lunch, because geography doesn't allow for that. And unless you're going to completely destroy any semblance of a feeder or any kind of community-based predictable thing, and remember, SES changes annually. It's not a data point that is that you can anchor in. That being said, we already know that if your house is close to water or if it's up on a hill, it's going to cost more than those that are not. So there are some things that we can do to try to work on that. And I think especially in this area, in the southeast quadrant, there's lots of conversations that we need to continue to try to do our best work with that. One of the things, and we told the committee this as well, that just because we can't have all the impact we want to have on with regards to equity and how SES is impacting schools across our region, there are things that the district can follow up on, and we're doing that work as well when we talk about the aspects of the curricular audit and all the different pieces that we're building out to meet those expectations. And it doesn't have to just be geography that we're attending to.
And I think it was really, I was encouraged to hear that the parents understood that conversation, even more than I anticipated. They understood that equity is what is going to help some of those southern schools, and they weren't searching for equality for the exact SES, like you said. They were looking for real solutions for their communities, and they were proud of their communities. And I think sticking with that we have unique communities down in our southern schools, and they're all doing fantastic things. And getting in there and seeing that firsthand, and seeing how much love and commitment for these populations. It was awesome, and so I hope that's where we can pivot.
And I would just add that this winds up becoming highly personal for people. The fact that we're talking about the needs of all of our schools and the needs of a parent and their kid at any one of our schools is no important than the needs of a parent and the kid at any of the rest of our schools. And I think that's the part that became abundantly clear to us, was it doesn't matter where you live. You want the best for your kid, period. And I think that was what resonated with us so much. And I think it's also why we've got to continue talking about equity from that lens as well, not just geography.
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing to just remember for me, I was just kind of circling numbers here, but I think the committee members, speaking with them, they were so emotionally invested into the work they had done, and that there was almost a little bit of a letdown, right? Like, oh, we didn't do everything we wanted to, or we didn't get everything done, and we didn't tackle this area. But on the elementary map here, because you already highlighted high schools, but on the elementary map of the 5 elementary schools that are changing boundaries, we were able to create close the gaps, I guess, in the spreads on 4 of the 5 elementary schools when it came to SES, on all 5 when it came to racial and ethnic diversities, and on all 5 when it came to SPED population percentages. So those that were lower became closer to the median, and those that were high came down closer to the median. So, it wasn't for naught. We were able to make improvements and make some logical boundary decisions as well. So,
and I would just add that in the versions of this in which we stretch it out over time, so that you start looking at 5 to 10 years, you start to see data that actually puts the district in a very, very good place as it continues to grow and develop. It requires the addition of schools to do that, but if we're going to continue to grow, we know that we're going to need more schools. And I would just challenge that doesn't get lost in the fact that us waiting on this doesn't mean that we're not seeing that as a future plan. And in every version that we spec'd out for what it would look like in 3, 5, and 10 years, in every version, every one of those data points, if we can make those things happen, we improve that state of the district.
Okay, any more questions or comments on the attendance zone recommendations? Okay. Thank you, Dr.
One
Cook.
last, I just want to, Jeff is not feeling well, and I just do want to give a shout out to Jeff. Jeff walked this work along for the last 6 months, and just a tremendous amount of work and a lot of commitment, and we're very proud of both the effort and the product of what he brought to us on this work, and I just want to give him some public shout out on that. So thanks, Jeff.
Okay. All right, let's move on. We have spent a lot of time on some of these topics, so I'm going to move us along here. And I see Seth come out of the booth, so I'm going to welcome him up. We're moving on to item G, district work plan updates. I think Seth's going to update us on the ad hoc committee work around school start times.
That's correct. Good evening, members of the board. On February 19th, we had a school start times ad hoc committee meeting. We spent the bulk of that meeting going through our community feedback survey and approving different questions. That survey is out now through this Friday, March 6th. To date, we've received about 2,500 responses. Close to 1,000 of those are from students, and then about 1,500 mostly from parents and staff members. So at our next meeting, we're going to be reviewing that data and then hopefully working on a draft recommendation, which we'll get to you at your March 18th workshop.
Okay.
And that's all I had.
Any questions for Seth? Okay, thank you, Seth.
Thanks.
All right, and then looks like we're gonna get an update on the work plan draft. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good evening, Katie.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Superintendent Cook, Chair Morris Rowe, esteemed board members, and Ms. Town. I'm wondering, Dr. Cook, are you wanting to come? I'm more than happy if
You're
you would
good
like
to go. You go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. just checking. I wanted to thank you. I'm sure there was a lot of extra reading in the packet because of the curriculum management plan draft. So thank you so much for that time. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background of where this came from. Recommendation 3 of our curriculum audit asked us to create a comprehensive curriculum management plan that would support the effective delivery of a rigorous curriculum. And so shortly after I was hired in July, Dr. Mike Nelson and I went to Phoenix for some curriculum audit training from the group that did our audit. And then in October, we brought the CEO of that group to us to give us a little bit more training and to provide it in-house so we could also provide it to some teachers and instructional coaches and others who were interested. We updated 2100 and 2100P, and then we communicated those updates to our principals and our teachers. Since that time, I've worked on different parts of the plans and in different
different pieces, and some of those pieces you've already seen, and some of them you haven't yet. And so what I'm giving you today is the first best draft of this plan, which I will then take and share with administrators and teachers and get some feedback from before submitting a final draft for approval. So when we received training on the curriculum management plan, they recommended these various components be part of it, and we took some of the components and made them part of different frameworks or different plans that align and coordinate with one another. So for example, the vision for district classrooms and direction for curriculum delivery, that's really instruction. So that lives for the most part in the instructional framework as part of that. The direction for curriculum assessment and student program assessment will live primarily within the comprehensive assessment plan. But that being said, all of these things will coordinate and align with one another when they're all together. So what is in the curriculum management plan is the philosophical framework, the direction for curriculum design, the direction for curriculum development, and the direction for evaluation and revision. And for the framework, you saw basically the beginnings of that when I presented the curriculum template. And so we said that curriculum really should be these things. They should be clear. In the Coeur d'Alene School District, we want it focused on student empowerment. We want it to be authentic and purposeful. We want it to be equitable and aligned. And we want it to be part of an ongoing cycle of improvement. And so the plan sort of spells out what that means philosophically for us. In the direction for design, I've included the information about the tightly and loosely held components, which were previously approved, the must-haves and the may-haves. And I can understand there might be a desire to say, let's make sure we have all of these things, and I agree that is the ideal. By specifying the difference between the must-haves and the may-haves, the must-haves are the items that the curriculum auditors will look for when they are completing an audit. The may-haves are really nice to have and will help us as we design. And so where I have found that particularly helpful as a curriculum director is in when I'm working with when I'm working with our team, we can prioritize first those must-haves as we're designing, and then we can go back to the may-haves and include those. But it just provides us an opportunity to prioritize our work plan. Our scope, our learning objectives, and our alignment model. So it's critical that we align our written curriculum to our vision for instruction and then our assessment. And then finally, our direction for development, evaluation, and revision. So from Hanover research, we were able to identify these 5 stages for really valuable curriculum development. And then as we're writing, so that's the process that we would follow as we're writing the curriculum. And then the phases, that's what I've shown you before with the curriculum cycle a little bit. But the purpose of that is just to show where each of those stages lives within the plan. My next step, as I said earlier, is to talk to various stakeholders and receive feedback on this plan. I also am going to work on creating a document that shows where each subject and grade level will live within the curriculum cycle, so that we can kind of start forward planning our work. And also our curriculum management materials, procedures, because that's a big part of what we're doing. What questions or comments what questions could I answer, or feedback could I receive for future?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Katie. Kind of like I said to Kate last month, this was just an amazing document. I thought that obviously took a lot of time and a lot of energy. And I appreciate you addressing my must-haves and may-haves and articulating that to where it makes sense. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, other questions, comments? I appreciate this too. There's a lot went into this, I know. Dr. Cook and I was just pointing out one that stood out to me, probably because I'm a trustee, but it's in the roles and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And under superintendent, it said approved district curriculum. And that seemed like a mix-up potentially there. And so I think he said, well, we just need to work on the wording there. Maybe that's developed. That was on page 14 of 58.
Okay.
That
Yeah, we can.
I think the approval to me would still lie to the board, but maybe it's develop or I don't know what word you want to use, but
Agreed. I had adopt the curriculum up above under the Board of Trustees, so I saw that as being more like a stronger verb that you're actually. And that approval for the superintendent was more like, yes, I agree. But we can definitely work on the wording to reflect that better.
approve is board function, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. I see Scott Maben's coming out, and he's going to talk to us about grandfathering of students. We've had that, or variations of kind of priority levels for a month or so through a couple of community events, open houses that we've hosted that have been pretty successful. We've had nice turnouts of both of those and a lot of great feedback that's kind of worked its way in here. And so this is coming to a head where we're going to have to approve this at some point, and I think I've heard either March 18th or potentially the April meeting if there was some sort of holdup, but that would be a challenge to extend beyond that because we need to figure out who's going to be where, and so we can put teachers there and all those sorts of things. So, Mr. Maben. Good evening.
Good evening, trustees, Chairman Morrisroe and Superintendent Cook. Thank you for the time to walk through where we are at with this, the draft transition plan for potentially grandfathering different levels of students to dovetail with the implementation of the new attendance zones. We've been working on this for the past couple of months. And I'm just going to walk through with you what that document looks like and remind our folks watching from home where they can read this, where they can find it on our website and read it. We have shared it out a few times already, and we'll do that again in the next day or two. So we've been very careful to remind the public that may be looking at this document online that this is still in a tentative stage and would be pending approval of the board, as you just mentioned, in the next month to two. We developed this from public feedback that we received in a number of communications that we received at the district office from the public, as well as I'm going to say the 2 evenings of board listening sessions that we hosted during our boundary open house meetings. And I know that was broken up into two opportunities per night, so really like 4 sessions with some good turnout in those rooms, as well as feedback that we received during your discussions at your January 6th and January 13th meetings. So there's been quite a bit of input that's gone into where we're at now. So I'm going to start with the elementary schools, and with the priority level 1. We've talked about recognizing the commitments that we as a district and that you as a board have already made to recognize the importance of the students currently enrolled in our magnet schools and that commitment to remain in those schools through their elementary years. Same goes for the students who would be moving with NEXA to the new site this fall, and also students of district staff members as outlined in the master articles. So that's priority level 1. And then here we're careful to note that everything that follows would be subject to the availability of space in our classrooms and at the various schools. So I'll move right along to priority level 2. Here we talk about students that essentially have at some point been required to attend a school outside of their zone because of the lack of space in the school that they're hoping to, that they're zoned for, and so that they basically in a situation where they're forced transfer. And then we also include at the priority 2 level all 5th grade students that might be impacted by the zone change, and their siblings, their younger siblings who would also be enrolled in elementary school, and then students with the IEP and 504 plans. And we've kind of touched on that in the earlier discussion as well. I'm going to move on. Priority level 3 would capture maybe a narrow group of students, but essentially these would be students who would be coming into kindergarten this fall. Those families might have the expectation that the school that they would traditionally have been zoned for provided that opportunity for full-day kindergarten, the tuition-free full-day kindergarten, and then as a result of the zone changes, they become aware that that is no longer an opportunity at the new school, that they may not have the same full-day kindergarten opportunities. And so this would be an accommodation for those students, those families. Here's where it really broadens out. That's pretty much everyone else in the district, students in grades 1 through 4 who reside in the district. And then at the last priority level, we capture those few students and those families who have been enrolled for the past few years who reside outside of the district, as well as their siblings. So again, all those levels from 2 to 5 are dependent on the availability of space. Questions on elementary?
Under the priority level 2, 5th grade students impacted by zone change and their currently enrolled siblings. On some of the other examples of grandfathering you guys had sent us, they qualified that for 1 additional year. I didn't know if that's something we wanted to think about, or if we're going to, like let's say it's a 2nd grader and they have a 5th grade sibling, are they going to stay them for the duration, or will they then make? So I think we probably just need to add some more language there, whatever direction we choose to go.
Yeah, could do that. Okay. All right, I'm going to jump back ahead here.
How about on that level 2,
okay.
Liza had brought up the 504 IEP stuff and programs not available. And I guess I read that a little differently than I think her interpretation was. And maybe I'm just reading it wrong, but I envision, say, my own student who's got a speech IEP, and so for a test they have some sort of accommodation or something like that. That would be That's something that'd be available at every school. But if you had a student that's in a life skills program or one of the other specialty programs, that's not available at every school. And that's where there may be some difference there. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
So there's really two ways to interpret this. And the first one is that, and this would actually apply 100% of the time, is that we don't have the capacity, no school district does, to offer every programming option that we would provide at every one of our schools. And so students are subject to that 100% of the time. You may have to go to a different school to get access to a particular programming. The nature of where this comment started was beginning with the idea that some kids, theoretically and pragmatically both, could be so traumatized by the move from one school to another and are so fragile in a lot of different ways that we may want to give consideration to the fact that it may cause more headache and problems for that particular child to put them in a new environment, compounded by maybe they're a fifth grader too, and this is the only school they've ever known. And so the language is accurately captured in both forms. And I think what Liza, I forgot her first name, her last name, was pointing out that the way that it was written that's on our webpage is actually accurate, that programmatically we would put them where they're best going to be served. However, we also want to capture the idea that we want to give flexibility to IEP teams and 504 teams that if they believe that this would be a better decision to hold this student at their current school because they feel like that would be the right move, that's something that's important to consider. And I think that our teams wouldn't necessarily just say, yeah, we're going to do that for every kid because it's the easy decision. I think they're going to do that in circumstances where with certain kids, it makes all the difference in the world because those relationships have been established. And it was very clearly articulated as a concern at the listening sessions, and we've heard this from parents of specifically at-risk students, and we talk about this often. Some kids just, they don't do well when a sub comes, and it's, in essence, what we're doing is putting them, we could be arguably, and parents would know best for their kid, whether or not their kid is likely to be successful in that. So we wanted to capture it, but also recognize the difference in there's subtle but yet important differences. And I think that might even be her language that she used, that there's subtle important differences in it being written this way and the way that it was written on the webpage earlier. So.
And then the only other one, and I know we're confusing concepts here a little bit, but on elementary specifically, that I don't see listed, and I don't know how we capture, but is existing open enrolled students. And that's probably the question I hear the most, because there's, 200 of them or so at the elementary level, or 150, I think, maybe not quite that much, but 100 plus. Like, where do they stand in that? I don't know, is that, it just falls under open enrollment and it's based on space available?
Yeah, I think that's, we've run some preliminary numbers on these models as projected right now, and we've got to dig in a little deeper. But I think that we saw that there was about 400 or so students that would be impacted by the elementary changes. And of those, I think 470, was a number I saw early on. Some of those kids are actually open enrolled to schools that they may not have to be open enrolled to now. And some of them now would have to, if they wish to continue, would have to be open enrolled. And so if you're currently open enrolled at Skyway and your current zone is Winton and now your new zone is Nexa, but you still wish to attend to Skyway, that's an open enrollment. And I think that's the difference in how we're approaching this, is we're treating the neighborhoods and attendance zoned students as grandfathering, and we're treating everybody else as open enrollment. And I think we'll be able to accommodate some. I do think that's going to be the case, and especially some schools more than others because they have more space. But nonetheless, when it comes right down to it, we're a choice school district, and we're going to try to do everything in our power to accommodate as much choice as we can. And truth be told, that the fact that we're opening a new school with 500 more seats, we should be able to accommodate more choice.
So, Scott, could you just back up 2 slides, I think, to priority 4? So, is it right to say, if you have that question presented to me, that those current open enrolled students would fall here under priority level 4 under the grandfathering rules?
There's different policies. We have to really be careful. That was my concern.
But who are we grandfathering? We're grandfathering only students impacted
By the rebounding.
by the rebounding.
I think we need to do a better job of communicating that, because I think there's going to be some.
Yeah, I'd like to, I see what you're saying now. I understand your question earlier. Then that, is there a way to articulate that grandfathering is for students who lived in a zone that were changed, or, however we're saying that it doesn't cover open enroll? That's what we're saying.
Is there a spot as well? Because I really feel like the next question is going to be busing and just clarification, almost like that's the next, maybe on both of these documents, just to say this document includes busing right from the get-go or not, and there's been no real busing conversation, but I think that really needs to be cleared up, especially for those that are maybe newer to the district.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a bigger challenge. And part of what we're trying to find out, and Jeff and I were just talking about this earlier today, once we get the trigger pulled on the zones, then we're, like, for example, we're going to have, theoretically, 9th graders in our high schools that live in that are now expected to go to one of our high schools that may have a sibling, 10, 11, or 12, that is currently going to the other high school. And we could be potentially forcing them to both get on a bus to go to those. And so there's going to be some limits to our ability to accommodate grandfathering, and we can't do transportation for grandfathering, and we can't know the answer to that until we know what we've got to do to accommodate all those. Like when we voted that Nexa students that live in, that they're going to get to go to Nexa that live in what would eventually be, if it's approved, the Hayden Meadows zone. We're going to have to transport those kids, and that comes at a cost. That means that bus can't transport other kids, and so we're not in a position at this point to be able to add that. That might change people's decisions, and that's going to be, it's a part of that order of operations. The first thing that has to happen is we've got to see what the change of those 470 students, what impact that has, and then what commitments that we are on the books that we have to live by, and then see what we could do on next steps.
And that was the one glaring thing that I think is missing on our grandfathering is high school. I think we need to have a conversation like 5th graders. If we're asking 9th graders to move and they have older siblings in a high school, I'm not in a position to ask families to be invested in 2 separate high schools in a 2 high school town. So I would like to see some protection for, if you've got 2 siblings and they're Vikings, or if you've got 2 siblings and they're going to Lake City, I think they should be able to stick together as a family. It's a huge commitment to invest in 2 separate high schools, especially until we get the schedules aligned. I think it would be really difficult for families.
Are they covered on the high school plan? I know we're jumping ahead and driving Scott crazy probably, but wouldn't they fall under submit an open enrollment request and then like current? So, I mean, I know it's more complicated. We could just call it out.
I don't think it's a super large number of students, but I think because we are a 2 high school town, that's something I think we're going to get a lot of blowback.
I think taking that a step further, the issue that we wind up with is now we're muddying what qualifies as grandfathering and what qualifies as open enrollment. Because if I've never been to that school before, but my brother has gone, And now I'm saying that because my brother or my sister is there in that school, now I should be grandfathered into that school. That's actually,
But that's no different than fifth graders currently enrolled that kindergartners are getting to start.
but they've gotten to go, a fifth grader's gotten to go to that school previously.
Right, but I'm saying if you have a sophomore or a junior at a high school and an incoming freshman, they should be able to attend high school together as siblings. We shouldn't be separating families in high school.
I don't disagree with you, but the designation we're trying to keep is that grandfathering is about keeping you in your current school.
Right, but how is it different if you have a kindergartner and a fifth grader, and we're allowing kindergartners to enter in the school with their fifth grader? How is that different than a sophomore?
We're not actually allowing the kindergartner to go because all we're doing is saying the fifth grader, if theoretically the fifth grader gets grandfathered, that we would honor that their family doesn't have to be split.
Right, they're a priority level too. I think right below fifth graders, there should say ninth graders who have siblings currently enrolled in high school. It's the same analogous situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you do look at that, it says fifth grade and they're currently enrolled siblings. So I guess a kindergartner next year would be their currently enrolled sibling.
Because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. I hope that is including kindergartners. I don't think we should be in the business of, that's what my question was, do they get to stay for a year? I guess it was anticipating that we would have kindergartners, but how long would they get to stay? Because 5 years is longer than 4, but I think there's a lot of research out there, and almost every example plan that you sent us kept families together. It's just too much of an investment to ask families to be separated, especially at high school and I think elementary.
I mean, I would agree the number's probably pretty insignificant. It's fairly small that you have someone that falls into that category. And given that both schools have a little room, I would agree. You'd just say that incoming ninth graders would have the opportunity to go with the older sibling that's grandfather. I mean, I remember that at a listening session, at least one person bringing that up. Transportation, I agree. I think that's going to be key for a lot of these people, whether they can do it or not. But I think until we have our hands around that, that's a difficult question to answer. My guess would be it's much easier to accommodate at the high school level than it is at an elementary, right?
One of the things we talked about is that we're not necessarily likely talking about Skyway to Hayden Meadows or Winton to Dalton, or we're talking about mostly just neighboring schools. So it might even be that we're shuttling, just to try to help accommodate that fifth grade, that wants to finish out at the school, and we just shuttle them over to the elementary school, and they're just a little later from one drop point to the next.
I think a quick feasibility study, just using the new busing technology that we have, would probably give us our answer. And I think you're right. It doesn't seem like it would be onerous, but I think before we make any kind of statement, we should see what the numbers look like. But I think you did bring to my attention now that priority 2. I saw that as kindergartners, and now I see what you're saying. It says currently enrolled siblings. That is not kindergartners. And so maybe some clarification for me, and I'm open for discussion. The examples that I saw was kindergartners and probably other enrolled siblings for a time frame, and we probably need to figure out what that time frame looks like and what you think we could accommodate. So anyway.
And I just want to remind you that some of these are going to be completely predicated on space. So there are going to be situations in which we're not going to necessarily be able to honor the requests of families, especially in schools that are already extremely highly populated. And so we'll be bringing some of that information back. But I think we can make these modifications to the grandfathering and make sure that it's captured there. So if the space is available, that we can make those accommodations.
Okay, other questions or comments? So you're going to make those modifications that we've discussed here tonight, get that updated, send that out?
Yes.
I know you have the high school here, but I don't know that we need to go through high school.
Okay. Thank you.
Or middle school. Okay, thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
All right, let's keep moving on here. We got Katie coming back up with an update on the math academies.
Thank you, Chair Morrisroe, and I will try not to give away any of your board functions this time. The Secondary Math Academy met again on February 14th. This was a teacher flex day. And you can see that is a picture of them on that day sharing information about essential questions and enduring understandings in a speed dating scenario. So we were trying to keep it on theme. So our progress so far, this was the anticipated progress that we were hoping for in our development. And we have been meeting on those dates, and we are working to achieve our goal of having everything completed and ready to go by the beginning of summer for our first best draft. So right now, what teachers have completed are our essential and supporting standards. They got feedback from their peers on that. Then they drafted that into our priority objectives and module level supporting objectives in their scope and sequence. Right now, there's still items in progress are their unit level assessment items. Those are almost complete. They're receiving feedback now between now and March 26th on that and their scope and sequence from their peers. They're adding their enduring understandings and essential questions and working on aligning our current district resources with what we have. So Chair Morrisroe asked for some examples of previous work and current work. So in our previous work, you can see, like, here's a sixth grade example. So for assessment, you can see that they had topic 1 assessment, topic 2 assessment. Right now, what they're working on, and again, this is a draft. This is not a completed draft. You can see that they have their unit concept or theme, their big idea, and then they have multiple assessments that are being used to measure the objective, and then as well as some notes. And so those are the things that they're including in there, along with links that they're going to get feedback from their peers and each other. So here's an example. The priority objective says students can use ratio reasoning to critique solutions of real-world problems through interpreting repeated reasoning by analyzing and creating various models. So that's their priority objective right now. And then they have the beginnings of a performance assessment over here on the right. And as you can see right now, this example does not ask them to critique reasoning, but that would come next in this performance task. And then one of the things that we've been really focusing on is how we support each other and how we are a community of learners together. And so one of the things that they created during this time was just sort of thinking each of these trees represents one of our individual members, and then what comes in between are what links us together. So what questions can I answer for you right now?
Mine's a basic one. I've forgotten now. Tell me again what you're bringing back for us this summer, because I know it's a lot, but I was in my mind trying to remember. Okay, I think math 1.
So 6th grade math, 7th grade math, 8th grade math. Integrated concepts, math 1, honors math 1, math 2, math 1, not yet honors math 1. That will come in the next cycle. Math 2, honors math 2, math 3, honors math 3, and pre-calculus.
Oh, wow. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Okay, other questions? I had to do a laugh. I'm going to point it out to you on assessments there.
Yes.
On your slide, the assessment is mixing drinks, which I loved. I had a good chuckle out of that, but it's a mixing drinks task.
So and some we have renamed that the orange juice task. And yes, good eye. So yes, the basically what it's asking them to do is look at ratios and proportionality, and so it's saying if you add this much concentrate to this much water, how what will have the most what will have the most concentrated drink. So that was part of the feedback that we're giving one another, is that let's think about the names. But and so really, and what that does though, the way that it's presented is kids are given a variety of scenarios, and they have to kind of work their way through it and think through like how they would solve the problem and what they would really need to know in order to determine that. And then it gives them some examples of other kids who have done some thinking around this problem, and then they have to critique the reasoning of those other students.
What's kind of your assessment of the team and how they're feeling about all this work and what they're shooting for? How are they feeling about it?
They're deep in the mud right now. They are walking through it, and they are, I think they're a little concerned about being able to deliver the product that they want to deliver on time. And I think, though, that they are very committed to this work, and they are working extremely hard to do this work. And I am going to walk alongside them, and I have relentless optimism that we are going to be able to do great things, in understanding that it is an iterative process, and our product that we present to you in June is not our final product. We'll be working on revising and making it stronger and better throughout the following year.
Kate, do you have a priority on, if you guys do run out of time, that there will be certain things that we do see come spring or early summer?
Do you mean
like if you can't get that big group of courses finished, is integrated math, is that priority 1? Calculus priority 2? Is there
honestly, they're all pretty priority, high priority, especially the courses that we don't currently have curriculum for. So that would be Integrated Math 3, Honors Integrated Math 3. So that would probably definitely be highest priority. I feel confident that we will be able to meet that goal. It's just, yes. What other questions might I be able to answer?
Looks like that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, what? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, we're almost there. A couple more things left here, and this one's a lot of information coming from Dr. Nelson here. Item J, high school cohort data analysis.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Morris-Rowe. Superintendent Cook, last chance. You want to come back over? Oh, I don't know. I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to deliver about 40 pages worth of graphs for you. This was a lot of fun to put together. I know that seems very sad, but I do enjoy visualizing the work of our students. So thank you. We'll continue to provide phase 2 coming up for you next month. But there are a couple of pieces before we get into our high school data that we want to run through. The first is to let you know how our students performed on our semester exams for both Math 1 and Math 2. You may remember that both Math 1 and Math 2's end-of-course assessments were called out into the curriculum audit. We did administer those exams, and we do have some of the distributions. We also wanted to make sure that you understood that we don't just sit on results. We want to show you how we're going to look at the results and start analyzing how to improve our exams with every distribution. So ultimately, here's the score distribution for our Math 1. Now this is just the multiple choice section. In our Math 1 assessment, there is a multiple choice section and a free response section. So in this particular section, students were given 4 answer choices and they were asked to select their best choice. As you can tell up in there, we have a fairly bell-shaped curve, which would mean that the distribution is pretty consistent across. Most of the students, unfortunately, however, were in the highest area of the bell at 60.7%, which ended up being our mean average for that section of the assessment. Secondarily, we take a look at that same distribution then for Math 2. You may notice there's a little bit more space between the bars in this particular case, and the reason for that is that in this particular exam, each of the multiple choice questions were marked as 2 points apiece. In the previous exam, in Math 1, some were worth 1, some were worth 2, some were worth 3, so you have a greater distribution of those. Again, however, the mean average of this was 58.11%, so a failing average for just the multiple choice sections for that. That is skewed, however, because there was some miscommunication at Lake City High School, and unfortunately several questions on this particular part of the exam were not administered with all students. And I'll be more than glad to share with you their discussion on that if you would like.
Mike, do you know how are the scores on the write-in piece of the exam?
Yeah, I'm about to share that with you here.
Thank you.
So the next slide that I have for you has 2 different wheels. Now this takes into consideration the teacher's scoring of the open response questions. So this mixes both the multiple choice section and the teacher scored student responses. In this particular case, we can look up and down the semester exam column that appears on our report card grades, and we can see that for the semester exam, about 22% received an A or a B in Math 1 for their final exam. And about 30% of students in Math 2 received an A or a B. There still is a pretty large red section there, though. However, those are students who unfortunately received a failing exam overall, a failing score overall on their exams. So now that we shared with you a little bit about what the scores look like, here's what we're going to be doing. We scanned all of our exams, so every student's exam was scored and scanned by our district. The first is we're going to start taking a look at our multiple choice sections. The graph that you see on the left-hand side shows a question that may be brought into further review. The correct answer on that particular question was B. It has the asterisk next to it. However, you'll notice that a great number, about 48% of our students, chose answer C. So in coming up at our Math 1, Math 2 retreats, we'll have an opportunity to go in and look at that particular question and see why more students chose answer C in that particular question. Of even greater power, we will be able to look at every student's response to, say, question number 1 on the short answer section. So in fact, here are 2 samples from our students, randomly chosen throughout the district. You can see, just by looking at the question, that the students really attacked the questions in 2 very different ways and had 2 very different answers. So we now have the capacity to be able to run a report to show every student, all 700 kids who took the assessment, and look at what were the common mistakes that were being made. That then adjusts our instruction and curriculum to make sure that we're bringing more students toward proficiency. Those are the examples that I have for you for our Math 1, Math 2 semester exam distributions. Do you have anything at this particular point?
Is this the same exam? Are these the same exams that were administered last year?
Yes, ma'am.
And do we see any improvement from scores from last year to this year?
Very little. There was a bump at one school over the other, but not statistically significant.
And were these scores included in students' grades? I know there was some talk about, per policy, we were holding that, but were these?
It was just less percentage-wise, I think, because we'd had a mix-up. Right, so so the percentage was
correct.
10% instead of 15% of their grade. Dr. Nelson, on this, the work you're showing on this last slide here,
Yes,
that
sir.
was something we did last year as well?
This is the first time that we've analyzed the exam in this capacity. And our Math 1, Math 2 teachers will all be together within the month, and we'll start going through these assessment items and again start refining the work for the coming year.
And my question was going to be, if we did this work last year, why didn't you think we'd plug some holes?
This was the first time that we did that, and there was some confusion because I think the practice was that our teachers give the assessment and score the assessment. Now we ask them to give the assessment, score the assessment, and send it back to us. And we found different things when looking at the exams in this way. And I think it's going to better inform our practices moving forward.
So next year, it's fair to say that students will not be taking these exact exams because they were called out in the curriculum audit, and they will be new, improved, more aligned with the state standard?
As part of the curricular design process, the exams are part of that review. Plenty of orange juice tasks coming. Should we move on to the high schools? So Trustee Morris-Rowe and Superintendent Cook, you had asked for a review comprehensively of our high schools. Tonight I'd like to take you through a couple of standardized assessments, but also take a look at the demographics of our schools. We recognize that our staff is our greatest asset. They are the ones who work with our students every single day. So the first set of slides actually takes a look at the demographics not of our students, but of our teachers, the people who we put in front of our kids every single day. Again, this is part of phase 1 of our work. The first slide takes into account how our students or how our teachers are distributed in terms of years of service. This is overall years of service. So even if somebody comes in new to our district, but has experience in either the state or district, that would be reflected in here. You'll notice that in both cases at both Coeur d'Alene and Lake City High School, as well as Venture High School, the greatest distribution are teachers 0 to 5 years of total service. The next greatest distribution comes from teachers in grade years 6 to 10 at Lake City High School, and then years 11 to 15 at Coeur d'Alene High School. As we move through the slides, the next slide actually turns those numbers into percentages. And it's pretty stark when you take a look at it that 59% of teaching staff at Lake City High School are 10 years or newer in the profession. As we move through some of these slides, I also wanted to share with you some mean averages because I know we've been talking about math specifically. The mean average for our high school teaching staff is right around 11 years. And I'd like to give you the averages for certain departments within all of our high schools. Our special educators average 4.4 years. Our certificated computer teachers, 6.3 years. Arts teachers, 8.6 years. English language arts, 9 years. Mathematics, 10.7. Science, 10.8. And history, 10.11. So you'll notice when you hear those, you see a lot of core content in there that is below the district average in terms of longevity. It could mean that we are certainly keeping our elective teachers and our non-core teachers greater than we are keeping our core teachers. So I have those broken down now for you in terms of years of service, overall staff in the sample size. Please note that at Lake City High School, for example, there are several teachers who teach part-time. In that particular case, they're not shown in the total sample size as 1/2, they're shown as 1. So that is explaining some of the difference why you see more staff at Lake City High School than Coeur d'Alene High School. Questions about longevity and staff demographics? All right, I'm not seeing you glaze over too much. Let's move right on to degrees. So it's not only how long they've been teaching in our system, but also how they've grown professionally through their own education. On this particular slide, you'll see the number of degrees that teachers have attained within our system. Overall, most of our teachers at our high schools have bachelor's degrees, a smaller amount master's degrees, and the smallest amount doctoral degrees. We have 2 doctoral teachers both at Coeur d'Alene High School in the same department. So that certainly would skew that a little bit along the way. The next slide then shows that same distribution in terms of percentage. Any questions about degree attainment? All righty, let's get to the good stuff. Student performance. Now we wanted to take a look at the standardized exams that students take over their course of enrollment within our schools. Some of the data that I'm going to be presenting you today is in cohort format, meaning we're tracking all students over 3 years. Some of them, because of the way that the exam is administered, we can't do that. The first example of why we couldn't do that is in ISAT. Do you know which grade level takes the ISAT in high school? 10th grade. Even though it's an 11th grade assessment. You may not remember that, but Idaho, it is a college exit exam. Idaho moved it to grade 10 so that it did not disrupt the SAT also in the junior year. So even though it's a 10th grade exam, it measures 11th and 12th grade standards. Here's the distribution of students and how they're performing on the ISAT by Smarter Balanced. The ISAT is scored on a 1 to 4 scale. And that scale score is basically identifying what level of proficiency students have in meeting college and career readiness skills. The minimum score for college and career readiness is defined by Smarter Balanced as a level 3. So this shows the percentage of students who have attained a 3 or higher on their selected exams. However, again, this is non-cohort data because students take the ISAT in grade 8, nothing in grade 9, only in grade 10, and then we don't have anything further from that. So each of the bars represented here on the screen are different groups of kids. You actually do notice a slight incline in proficiency at Coeur d'Alene High School, a slight decline in language arts at Lake City High School, and a kind of awkward distribution at Venture High School over 4 years. Moving away from language arts, let's take a look at mathematics. Again, non-cohort, just looking at grade 10 over 4 years. As we prepared to you last year, we did see a bump of 17% at Coeur d'Alene High School this last year. That would be our current juniors. And at Lake City High School, the numbers have been fairly flat, staying at 24%, which is where they were a couple of years ago. Venture High School has struggled. However, a couple of years ago, they did have 11% meet that college and career ready benchmark. So it's not just about overall proficiency. We'd also like to take a look at subgroups. Equity is a huge, important piece of what we do. So we'd like to break these numbers down for you a little bit in terms of subgroups. This first set of slides shows English language arts on the left-hand side, mathematics on the right-hand side. And what you'll notice are 2 years worth of data because of the fact that the state changed the calculation for this a couple of years ago with our ESSA waiver, the Every Student Succeeds Act waiver. If we look at the green bars on the left-hand side, Coeur d'Alene High School was at 68% for students just at free and reduced lunch. You can compare that to a 77% overall population. At Lake City High School, that number was 47%, compared to a 58% overall population. Venture High School was 10% total population, 7% of students who are identified as economically disadvantaged. Just as a reminder, that is meaning that a family of 4 is receiving or currently earning less than $27,750 annually. That's the current distribution. At mathematics, that distribution could be compared about 11% different, 55 to 44, 24 to 15, and 3% exactly at Venture High School. So they did match that as well. The next subgroup to take a look at is these are students receiving special education services at grade 10. Again, the first value that you see is from the 2018 school year. The second value is from our last school year in 2019. Unfortunately, in this particular graphs, there are large gaps between proficiency of students who are receiving special education services and those who are not receiving special education services, both in English language arts and in mathematics. The final subgroup that we wanted to take a look at is our demographics of race. To be able to make the graph a little bit easier to read, we moved away from identifying each race and simply said, let's compare our students who are white in origin, those who are not white in origin. You'll notice that the first bar on the left-hand side identifies all students. That would be the red bar in English language arts. Then comparing students of white origin and non-white origin. The gaps are greater at Lake City High School, in this particular case, especially with our non-white ELA students. In mathematics, we do see a greater gap at Coeur d'Alene High School in mathematics, where 55% of our students are proficient, but only 48% of our students who are not white are proficient. So in order to try to make this easy for you, I've placed all of these values in a table. You'll notice the white colored cells or cream colored cells on my monitor identify the entire student population. Anything that is a 5% difference or greater would be identified as statistically significant. So if you were to compare Coeur d'Alene High School's ELA average of 76.6%, we would say that there is a statistically significant gap between students receiving free and reduced lunch and students receiving special education. Can I pause for a moment to let you digest and ask any questions that you have about the ISAT by Smarter Balanced?
And I would just like to iterate and emphasize, if you recall, when we talked about the data we got from the curricular audit, that one of the things that we wanted to start making sure that we were tracking was the achievement of all students, so that any measure of gaps, we would try to find and identify achievement gaps and do our best to ameliorate those. And one of the things that we're finding is that we've got some work to do with that kind of research. And I think that's, we anticipated so, but this data is starting to bear that out.
Dr. Nelson, looking at only this data, it's pretty gut-wrenching. It's definitely eye-opening and concerning, and that's just if you look at this data. And I realize there's more data points, but is there, and it's not cohort, so it's hard to. It's hard to evaluate the data because you're comparing these kids to those kids, sort of a thing, and you're not looking at necessarily growth. But I think probably in anything we do, we would want to see increases as a general rule. And so we're not seeing that, or we're seeing gaps divide or gaps increase between the two schools potentially. Is there a feeling as to why that is, or why that's becoming, or is there a way to, I know you can't look at cohort, but looking at students, where were they at 8th grade, and is this correlating, I guess?
Chair Morris, members of the board, I believe that part of your answer is going to be found in the next set of data, which shows the PSAT, which we can track over 3 years. I'm going to point to a couple of values that I think might be able to answer your question. In addition, I presented to the trustees 2 weeks ago or so in our weekly update a more longitudinal view of ISAT performance, and we tried to also tie that into PSAT and SAT, even though that it does have some irregularities in doing so. I think we can look at some of the inconsistencies that we see, possibly even into the earlier years. We can track all the way back into some of our middle schools and elementary schools and see the differences that our schools are performing at and how those gaps are continuing to escalate. I think that the next set of data might give you some of that, but I think the best people to be able to answer that are our high school administrators and middle school administrators as well. Any other questions regarding ISAT? With your permission, I'll move forward to the PSAT. Okay. PSAT. The preliminary scholastic aptitude test is provided every year for students in grades 9, 10, and 11. The PSAT 8-9 is a measure of 9th grade standards. The PSAT NMSQT, which is taken by grades 10 and 11, is a measure of college and career readiness. So it's similar to those 11th grade standards that we just saw on that. So we can make a connection between what students are receiving in grade 10 and into the PSAT as well. They're taken at 2 different times of the year, however, which becomes a little bit more of a challenge. The PSAT in the fall, the ISAT in the spring. But it is proven to be a pretty good indicator for us as to how students are growing throughout the system. So now we are taking a look at cohort data. The slides that you will see now represent only students who have 3 consecutive exams. So these are only students who took the PSAT currently as a junior in grade 9, 10, and this last fall in grade 11. So, a couple of things on the slide that I'd like to point out. First of all, I placed for you the college and career readiness benchmarks. You'll notice that the college and career readiness benchmarks grow from 20 points from grades 9 to 10 in English language arts, but 30 points from grades 10 to 11. Those numbers are consistent across the way. However, take a look at the entry scores that you see. At Coeur d'Alene High School, the average entry score for students, again, in that cohort was 479.32. At Lake City High School, that number was 451.11. That is a difference of 28 points. So if you think about the college and career readiness, you're expected to grow 20 points between grade 9 and 10. That would indicate that students at Lake City High School don't have the level of skill on this particular assessment at that particular time as Coeur d'Alene High School students. Now, certainly you see growth. There's good stair steps that are moving up along the way. But we're not seeing a closure of that gap year to year to year. Looking at mathematics, the college and career readiness benchmarks grow 30 points each particular year. Again, notice the difference between the 2 traditional high schools. Entry score at Coeur d'Alene High School, 466. Lake City High School, 440.6. The gaps in math are about the same at grade 9, but they actually grow even larger by grade 11 between the 2 schools, to a gap of about 35 points by grade 11.
Mike, can you kind of walk us through again the benchmarks and ideally, why the College Board sets these benchmarks and what they're supposed to tell us about our students moving forward?
Absolutely. So the college and career readiness benchmarks are artificially established by the College Board. They're artificially because of the fact that it's a guess. It is their presumption that students who meet the college and career readiness benchmarks have the greatest capacity to earn a C or better in a collegiate course. And it's basically a longitudinal study that they did several years ago to look at how students performed on the PSAT, SAT, and ultimately tracking their grades into their chosen college or university. So those scores that you see on the screen are their definition of what is college and career ready at that particular point.
And you probably know, because I know you have all this data, but the state averages? How are these scores?
Better.
Off the top of my head, yeah. I know we're ahead of the state average.
We
but,
are.
Yeah.
We're ahead of the state average in evidence-based reading and writing by 25 points-ish, and the math average is around 18 points-ish. That was as of last year. I don't know that I've collected that data for the current school year. So then we talk about college and career readiness next. This is the percentage of students who are meeting the college and career readiness benchmarks at each grade level. Unfortunately, you see a negative regression in these lines. The reason for that most likely is, again, we saw in the previous slide that our students are growing. However, they're not growing to that level that the College Board has established. 20 points of growth between 9 and 10, 30 points of growth between 10 and 11 in evidence-based reading and writing, 30 points a year in mathematics. So students are still performing well, but at the same time, they're not growing as fast as the College Board would anticipate based on their metrics.
For me, this slide, I think, was the biggest gut punch, seeing, especially for math. Is it, a red flag? Is it a harbinger of something that we're not catching? I mean, to see the regression for both schools, and particularly Lake City, if I was a parent, I would be really concerned if that.
Well, we are absolutely concerned about the pretty large drop at Coeur d'Alene High School. We had reported that to you. It was a real surprise to us to see the 17% fewer kids met that benchmark this last year. We worked with our college and career advisors, and we shared with you some of their plans to ensure student success, because those same students in the gray bars are going to be taking their SAT in the spring. It certainly could be a false positive, but at the same time, that's not how we've articulated our patterns to be able to grow. So can I move off this slide if it's not? I'm very happy. Just want to make sure you're with me. Let's now start to slice some of this data that we're seeing a little bit. In this particular data, again, we're looking for about a 5% variance, and I'll point out some areas that might be of concern. These are students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, or economically disadvantaged students. One of the challenges that we have at the high school is that we do always believe that we have underreporting of free and reduced lunch, that students at our high schools don't always self-identify as meeting those requirements. So we actually see many fewer applications at the high schools, so it's a little tough to be able to do that. We do see a 5% variance at Coeur d'Alene High School in mathematics, between 497 and 472 at grade 11. But all the rest of them are within that 5% zone. Second slice is receiving special education services. Unfortunately, in this case, there is a large variance in scale score between students receiving special education services and those who are not. Again, this is cohort data. And here again is a reference to students by those who self-identify as white and those who are identified as non-white based on their intake every single year. These are more in line with what we would expect to see. So once again, I've put everything into a table for you so you can quickly cross-reference between the white shaded cells and the neighboring cells of free and reduced students receiving free and reduced lunch, students receiving special education, and students who are identified as non-white. In this particular case, I put scale score. So a 5% gap is about 40 points between the two. So if you do see about a 40-point gap between anything in the white cells and their neighboring cells, that is an area of concern. Questions regarding the PSAT?
Yeah, I just have to ask, and please feel free to jump in. When I look at the PSAT data, because it is the only cohort data that we have that we can look at, and I look at the math in particular, I have some heartburn, and I have to wonder, do we need to ask ourselves, are these scores a reflection of our new curriculum? I know we're improving it, but I think it's a question we should ask ourselves. And I look at it, and it's the first thing I think of. And I think this set of students is the first students that we're really monitoring and looking at. And so, comments?
I think one of the things that became quite evident to us was the need and the discussion for tracking, first of all, the achievement gap that we have between groups of students, tracking it, and then looking at it from a lens of both what our student groups performing like, and then also looking at it on a grander scale of our student experiences different at our schools, at each of our high schools, and then thirdly, are we providing them the curricular resources that they need to deliver the best product? And I think that'll be a discussion that we never stop. And I think at this point, what we're finding is we're working and trending in the right direction, and we've got a lot more work to do.
On this, so these are current juniors and their results, so they're not in Math 1, Math 2, Math 3 track. They're in the traditional track, so they're not in our. If they're on grade level, they shouldn't be, right? Well, no, because we offer Algebra 2 still. So theoretically, a junior, if they took math their freshman and sophomore year, would be in Algebra 2 now, if they were on track.
With your permission, I don't have it prepared this evening, but I'd be more than glad to inform the board as to which courses these students are currently enrolled in, if that would help you a little.
I just think we're getting ready to reapprove curriculum and getting ready to dive into schedules and what's best for students. This is data that's probably very pertinent to that conversation.
I will have it for you.
And this is year 2 of.
Correct. We currently offer Math 1
For students who
and
took Math 1, they would be in the second year of
correct
integrated math.
If they were in a traditional format, they would be in Math 2 at this point, if they were in that cohort. Do you have enough energy to hit SAT? Okay. Last one. Let's take a look at how our juniors are performing at the end of the year now when they take the SAT. For our current juniors, you heard it tonight from our student body reports, SAT is coming middle of April. They are certainly doing a lot of preparations right now. I've put in the college and career readiness benchmarks, again established by the College Board at 460 for evidence-based reading and writing. This is non-cohort. Again, it's only taken by our juniors, so we can only look at it with different groups of kids along the way. You see our scores consistently are consistent at both Coeur d'Alene and Lake City High School for evidence-based reading and writing. A little bit more variance, but some growth at Venture High School. By the way, one of the things to note about SAT is the range that we have. A perfect score is an 800. And this last year, we actually had one student with a perfect score of 800 in mathematics, several students that get 780s in evidence-based reading and writing. But we also had kind of this negative bell-shaped curve as well, where we had a lot of students as well who are receiving 200s, 280s, something in there along the way. So it's also about talking about those students who are not performing very well and finding out what's going on. I'd be more than glad to show those distributions to you. Here's the 4-year non-cohort distribution in math. Again, still fairly consistent. Looking at our slices along the way, this is our students who are meeting the college and career readiness benchmarks. Again, non-cohort along the way. 68% of students at Coeur d'Alene High School, 65% at Lake City High School, 21% were identified as college and career ready at Venture High School. On the right-hand panel, 52% of students met the college and career readiness benchmark at Coeur d'Alene High School, 34% at Lake City High School, 3% at Venture High School. Looking at the students who were identified as economically disadvantaged, there is, again, an issue with the possible underreporting of free and reduced lunch. And in this particular case, students at Venture High School who were identified as economically disadvantaged actually outperformed their non-economically disadvantaged counterparts. Students receiving special education services, there are accommodations for the SAT if a student does qualify, but again, we do see a large gap at Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, and Ventura High Schools in both evidence-based reading and writing and math. Final slice is with race, students identifying as white versus non-white. Again, the red bar on the left-hand side identifies the entire student population. On the right-hand side, that would be the orange bar is the entire student population. There is a variance at Lake City High School in mathematics. You'll notice that the non-white students scored 38 points lower than their counterparts. And finally, hopefully an easy-to-use table puts it all together for you. Again, looking about a 40-point gap for a 5% variance. And if you didn't have enough fun tonight, we're starting to prepare phase 2 for you for a future board meeting that would look at the high school experience a little bit more. We'll also take a look at the NWA MAP assessments, but we're going to look at what percentage of students are taking online coursework, how many students are getting industry certifications, what percentage of students are going to K-Tech, what types of services are they being provided, what about associate's degrees, those types of things. We'll roll that all up into next week's data. Whew.
Next
Why not
month?
next week? Right. Yeah. Next month.
Okay.
Final questions?
Questions? Thank you, Mike. That was a lot of information there. So thank you for putting that together. Okay. Facility update. Looks like Mr. Maven's going to come do that, and we're stretching past 8 o'clock. So why don't we do the abbreviated version of the facility update if everyone's okay with that? And I know we've all been driving by and seeing it. It's big and yellow right now.
Hello again. Okay, abbreviated version. I'm going to set the mood here, if you don't mind. It's going to be a little easier to see some of these images from where you're sitting. So this is exciting. We have some new aerial photos that I wanted to show you. And Jeff wanted to pass along that we're making really major progress out there since the last report on the building. The second floor concrete has been poured, and you can see here in this angle that we actually now have a roof over those second floor classrooms, and the roofing membranes being applied to that part of the building, which will mean that it's dry for the duration of the project, and they can really get to work there on that second floor. Let's see, this was the pouring concrete that's already in now on that second floor. So these images were a few weeks old. We have a lot of this is now all roughed in. We had a fun event a few weeks ago with a group of third graders from Nexa that came out to the job site to check it out. They were working on calculating area, and so this gave them a wonderful opportunity to get into the building and just kind of see firsthand what some of those concepts are that they're studying. And there they are with their little hard hats on. Isn't that cute? The front of the building, we've got the stills going in for the entryway. That would be on the south side. Those will be toilets someday soon. But a lot of the HVAC, electrical, sprinklers are going in. And this, I believe, is on the first floor, but you're going to be seeing this happening soon on the second floor with the hallway and the framing of the rooms and the doorways, exterior sheathing, roof membranes all in. Again, that's on the south end. So that's the gymnasium on the left side of the frame, and then the rest of the school there pulling away from us on the right. Aerial of the gym. And this is a little surprise for you here at the end. So we were out there Friday. Well, we had a local aerial drone company out there doing some filming for us, got a lot of stills and video, and he'll be returning to the site 3 or 4 times between now and when it opens. And then Jeff Fuller and I also were out there Friday and met a Lake City High School senior who was touring the job site with the contractor for his senior project. And so we spent some time talking with him about his interest in the construction trades. That is it. A lot of progress, and they're going to, the weather's cooperated wonderfully with them through the winter, and so they're doing really well out there, and I think they're certainly on schedule, if not ahead of schedule at this point. So, can I answer any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Okay, this is a little unique. We have a couple policies for information there that are just that. They're there for information. That was a policy we approved a couple of months ago, or maybe longer than that now, but within the last year, and they're just splitting the form into 2 different documents. So we will not see that back. That does not need board action. Just board information items here for our calendar. We've talked about it a couple times, but we have the special meeting on the 18th. And then here in 2 nights, on Wednesday, is CEP State of the District, which I forgot to talk about earlier, which I wish I would have, but we have that coming up in a few days. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.